My wife threw a party to celebrate her big promotion. Her boss gave a speech. Janet succeeded despite having no support at home. Her husband is just a cleaner who can barely read and write. Everyone laughed. My wife said, "It's true, he's holding me back." Then I stood up and said, "That's interesting, because the company you all work for, I own it." The chandeliers in the grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel caught the light like frozen tears. I remember thinking that as I stood in the corner, watching my wife Janet laugh with her colleagues, her hand resting possessively on the arm of her boss, Richard Castellano. The room smelled of expensive perfume and cheaper ambition, that particular scent that clings to corporate gatherings, where everyone is performing their best version of success. I wasn't supposed to be there yet. Janet had told me to arrive at 8:30, after the speeches, after the toasts, after the important people had already made their impressions. "Just come for the end, Marcus," she'd said that morning, not meeting my eyes as she applied her makeup in our ensuite bathroom. "You know how these things are. Lots of industry talk. You'd be bored." I'd nodded, smiled, kissed her cheek, told her I understood, told her I'd be there at 8:30 sharp, in my best suit, the one she'd bought me last Christmas, navy blue and conservative. The kind of suit that says, trying hard enough to be presentable, but not hard enough to be noticed. But I'd arrived at 7. Call it intuition. Call it the small voice that had been whispering in my mind for the past 18 months, ever since Janet started working late, started taking weekend trips to conferences, started looking at me with something that wasn't quite contempt, but was definitely sliding in that direction. Call it whatever you want. I arrived early, slipped in through the side entrance where the catering staff were hauling in champagne by the caseload, and positioned myself behind a decorative column near the back of the room. No one noticed me. Why would they? I was just another shadow in a room full of light. Janet looked beautiful. God, she always did. Her red dress hugged curves that I knew better than my own heartbeat, or at least I thought I did. Her hair was swept up in that elegant twist she reserved for special occasions, the one that showed off her neck, the place I used to kiss her awake on Sunday mornings. She was glowing, radiant. This was her night, her celebration, her triumph. Director of Operations. That's what the promotion was. She'd been working toward it for 5 years, ever since she joined Castellano Industries. 5 years of late nights, of sacrificed weekends, of anniversary dinners canceled and birthday mornings rushed. I'd supported her through all of it, hadn't I? Made sure she had clean clothes, healthy meals when she remembered to eat, a calm home to return to when the corporate battlefield got too bloody. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't about to break my heart. Richard Castellano stood at the podium now, all silver hair and capped teeth, his suit probably worth more than most people's cars. He tapped the microphone twice, and the room fell into that expectant hush that powerful men command without effort. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, "we're here tonight to celebrate an exceptional achievement by an exceptional woman." Applause rippled through the crowd. Janet beamed. Janet Morrison has been with Castellano Industries for 5 years, and in that time she's revolutionized our operational efficiency, streamlined our logistics, and increased our profit margins by 37%. More applause. But what impresses me most about Janet isn't just her brilliant mind or her tireless work ethic. It's her determination, her ability to succeed despite significant challenges in her personal life. I felt my stomach tighten. The column I was hiding behind suddenly felt too thin. "You see," Richard continued, walking around the podium now, casual, conversational, "Janet has had to overcome obstacles that many of us in this room couldn't imagine. While we go home to supportive partners, to spouses who understand the demands of our careers, who can engage with us intellectually about business strategy and market trends, Janet goes home to someone who, well..." He paused for effect, and I could see Janet's face, frozen in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Let's just say, her husband is simple." Laughter. Scattered at first, then building. "Janet's husband is a cleaner," Richard said, and the way he said the word, cleaner, made it sound like something you'd scrape off your shoe. A janitor actually works at some office building downtown. Can barely read and write, from what Janet's told me. Sweet guy, apparently, but not exactly intellectually stimulating, if you know what I mean. The laughter was louder now. I watched faces I didn't recognize, people in expensive suits and designer dresses, people who probably had advanced degrees and stock portfolios, people who were enjoying this story about the simple janitor who'd somehow married up. In fact, Richard went on, warming to his subject, Janet once told me, and forgive me for sharing this, Janet, but it's too perfect. She once told me that having a conversation with her husband about her work was like trying to explain quantum physics to a golden retriever. Adorable, well-meaning, but ultimately futile. The room erupted. People were almost crying with laughter. I saw a woman in a green dress actually wipe her eyes. Somewhere glasses clinked. The chandeliers above seemed to spin, or maybe that was just my vision blurring. I looked at Janet, really looked at her, waiting for her to say something, to stop this, to stand up for me, for us, for the 12 years we'd spent building a life together. She was smiling, not the frozen, uncomfortable smile from before. A real smile. She took the microphone from Richard, and her voice when she spoke was clear, confident, carrying across the ballroom like a bell. Richard, you're terrible, she said, but she was laughing. But yes, it's true. Marcus, that's my husband. He means well. He really does. But the truth is, she paused, looking out at the crowd, playing them like a conductor with an orchestra. The truth is, he's holding me back. Silence. Then someone started clapping, and others joined in. A slow build of applause that felt like approval, like permission, like absolution for saying out loud what she'd apparently been thinking for God knows how long. It's exhausting, Janet continued, and her voice had taken on this confessional quality, like she was sharing a burden she'd carried alone for too long. Coming home from days like this, days when I've negotiated million-dollar contracts or restructured entire departments, and having to explain my day in words of 3 syllables or less. Having to pretend that his stories about mopping floors and emptying trash cans are just as important as the work I do. Having to be the only adult in the relationship, the only one who plans, who thinks ahead, who understands how the world actually works. She was building momentum now, and the room was with her, nodding heads, sympathetic murmurs. I could see it in their faces. They'd all been there, hadn't they? Stuck with someone who didn't quite measure up, who didn't quite understand the rarefied air they breathed in their corner offices and executive suites. So yes, Janet said, her voice firm now, final. Marcus is a good man, a kind man, but he's a janitor who can barely string a sentence together, and I'm done pretending that's enough. The applause was thunderous. I stood there behind my column, in my navy blue suit, in the shadows where I belonged, apparently, and I felt something inside me crack, not break. Breaking would come later. This was just the first fracture, the hairline split that would eventually spiderweb into 1,000 pieces. But here's the thing about cracks. Sometimes they let the light in, and sometimes they let something else out. I stepped out from behind the column. My hands were steady. My breathing was calm. I felt like I was watching myself from a great distance, like I was floating somewhere up by those chandelier tiers, looking down at a man in a navy suit walking slowly, carefully toward the front of the room. People noticed me about halfway there. A ripple went through the crowd, confused glances, questioning looks. Who was this? Some crasher? Security should really be better at these things. Janet saw me when I was about 10 feet away. I watched the blood drain from her face, watched her eyes go wide, watched her mouth form my name without sound. Richard Castellano looked annoyed, like I was a waiter who'd wandered into frame during an important photograph. I walked up the 3 steps to the small stage where the podium stood, The room had gone completely quiet. You could have heard a champagne bubble pop. I took the microphone from Janet's frozen hand. She didn't resist. Couldn't, maybe. I looked out at the sea of faces. All these people in their expensive clothes with their expensive educations who'd just spent the last 10 minutes laughing at the stupid janitor who couldn't read good. "Hi," I said. My voice echoed in the sudden silence. "I'm Marcus Morrison, the janitor, the golden retriever, the intellectual dead weight." Someone coughed. Janet's hand was on my arm now, pulling, urgent. "Marcus, what are you—" I gently removed her hand and kept my eyes on the crowd. "That was quite a speech," I continued. "Really, very moving, very honest. And you're right, Janet. Honesty is important. So let me be honest, too." I could see Richard Castellano moving toward me now, his face red, probably about to have security escort me out. But something in my expression must have stopped him because he froze about 5 feet away, uncertain. "You talked about how I'm just a cleaner, how I can barely read and write, how I don't understand the work you do here at Castellano Industries." I smiled. It felt strange on my face, like my muscles had forgotten how. "That's interesting, because the company you all work for, the one that signs your paychecks, that just promoted my wife to director of operations." I paused. The silence was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. "I own it." For a moment, nothing. The words hung in the air like smoke, not quite real, not quite believed. Then Janet laughed, a short, sharp sound that was more panic than humor. "Marcus, that's not— you don't—" "Castellano Industries," I said, my voice still calm, still even. Founded in 1987 by Richard Castellano Sr., went public in 1995, struggled during the 2008 financial crisis. Bought out in 2011 by Morrison Capital Holdings, a private equity firm based in Delaware. I saw Richard Sr.'s son go pale, saw understanding start to dawn in his eyes. Morrison Capital Holdings, I continued, is a subsidiary of Morrison Global Investments, which is wholly owned by the Morrison Family Trust. The trust has 3 beneficiaries: my late father, my sister Sarah, and me. Dad died in 2018. Sarah manages the day-to-day operations of our portfolio, which includes 17 companies across 6 industries. Castellano Industries is number 4 in terms of revenue, number 7 in profitability. I let that sink in. Watched the faces in the crowd shift from confusion to disbelief to dawning horror. "I don't work here," I said. "I never have. I'm not a janitor at some office building downtown. I'm the majority shareholder of the company that owns this one. I have been since I was 23 years old when my grandfather died and left me his share of the trust." Janet was shaking her head over and over, like if she just kept denying it, reality would shift to accommodate her. "That's not— you work at Bradford Tower. I've seen you leave for work in the morning. You wear those awful blue coveralls." "I volunteer at Bradford Tower," I said, looking at her now, really looking at her for the first time since I'd stepped on stage. "At the community center on the 3rd floor. I teach adult literacy classes twice a week. Help immigrants prepare for their citizenship tests. The blue coveralls are because I also help the building maintenance staff sometimes. Mr. Chen, the head janitor, is 82 and has a bad back. So yes, I mop floors sometimes. I empty trash. I clean toilets." I turned back to the crowd. "But I do it because I want to, not because I have to. I do it because my grandfather, the man who built Morrison Global from nothing, taught me that honest work is honest work, regardless of what kind. That helping people matters more than impressing them. That who you are when nobody's watching is who you really are." The silence was different now, heavier, suffocating. "I've been married to Janet for 12 years, I said. "We met in college. She was studying business administration. I was studying philosophy, though I switched to economics in my junior year. She knew who I was, knew about my family, about the money, about the companies. We talked about it on our 3rd date. I told her I wanted to live a normal life, that I didn't want people to treat me differently because of my last name or my bank account. She said she understood, said she loved me, not for what I had. I looked at Janet again. Tears were running down her face now, mascara tracking black lines down her cheeks. So we made a deal. We'd live modestly. I'd use my mother's maiden name professionally, Marcus Bennett instead of Marcus Morrison. We'd work, both of us, and build a life on what we earned together, not on what I'd inherited. The money would be there if we ever needed it. Medical emergencies, helping family, that sort of thing. But otherwise, we'd live like normal people. "Marcus," Janet whispered, "please." "She got a job at Castellano Industries 5 years ago," I continued, my voice still steady, still calm, though inside I was screaming. "I thought it was a coincidence. Out of all the companies in all the world, she happens to apply to one I own a controlling interest in. But it wasn't, was it, Janet?" She didn't answer. Didn't need to. The truth was written all over her face. "You wanted to prove something," I said. "Wanted to succeed on your own merits, climb the ladder, make it to the top. I get that. I respected that, but somewhere along the way, you started to believe your own story. Started to believe that I really was just a simple janitor. Started to be ashamed of me. Started to wish I was someone else. Someone more like..." I gestured at Richard Castellano, who looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. The weight of what I'd just revealed was settling over the room, like ash after a fire. People were looking at their phones now, probably Googling Morrison Capital Holdings, Morrison Global Investments, probably seeing my face on the board of directors page, probably feeling their careers flash before their eyes as they remembered every laugh, every smirk, every joke they'd made in the last hour about the stupid janitor. I set the microphone down on the podium. The sound it made, a dull thunk, was the loudest thing in the room. "Congratulations on your promotion, Janet," I said quietly. "You earned it. You really did. You're brilliant at what you do. But you're fired from being my wife." I walked off the stage, down those 3 steps, through the silent crowd that parted before me like a sea. No one spoke. No one moved. Behind me, I heard Janet start to sob. Heard Richard Castellano start to stammer some kind of apology or explanation or plea. I didn't turn around. I walked out of the grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel, out into the cool November night, where the chandeliers couldn't reach me and the laughter had finally, mercifully died. The first crack had opened. The breaking would come soon enough. I didn't go home that night. Home. That word had lost its meaning somewhere between the champagne toasts and the moment I'd walked off that stage. Home was supposed to be the place where you could take off your armor, where you didn't have to pretend, where someone knew all your worst parts and loved you anyway. What I had was a 3-bedroom colonial in Westchester with crown molding and a mortgage I'd been paying from a checking account while sitting on enough money to buy the entire neighborhood in cash. What I had was a lie with hardwood floors. Instead, I drove. Took the Audi, the modest one, the A4 that Janet had rolled her eyes at when I'd bought it because everyone at the firm drives at least a BMW, and just drove. North on the Taconic, windows down despite the November chill, letting the cold air slap the numbness out of my face. The highway was nearly empty at 9 p.m. on a Friday, just me and the occasional semi, and the white lines blurring past like accusations. My phone started ringing around 9:30. Janet, of course. Then again, and again. I watched it light up on the passenger seat, her face on the screen, a photo from our vacation in Santorini 3 years ago, her smile bright and real, and directed at me like I was the only person in the world. I'd taken that photo just after she'd said she loved me. Unprompted, just blurted it out while we were watching the sunset from our hotel balcony. Had she meant it then? Or had the lie already started, even back then? I let it ring, watched it go dark, watched it light up again. Somewhere past Poughkeepsie, I pulled off at a rest stop. The parking lot was mostly empty except for a few long-haul trucks their engines rumbling like sleeping dragons. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, staring at the fluorescent lights of a closed Burger King, and I let myself feel it. All of it. The humiliation, the betrayal, the absolute fucking absurdity of standing in a room full of strangers while my wife of 12 years told them I was barely literate. The way they'd laughed. God, that laughter. It echoed in my skull like tinnitus, a ringing that wouldn't stop. But underneath the hurt, underneath the anger, there was something else. Something colder and sharper and infinitely more dangerous. Clarity. I pulled out my phone, ignored the 17 missed calls from Janet, the 3 from Richard Castellano, the 2 from numbers I didn't recognize, probably other executives from the party, scrambling to do damage control. Instead, I scrolled to a name I hadn't called in months. Sarah Morrison Chen, my sister, CEO of Morrison Global Investments, the person who actually ran the empire while I played at being normal. She answered on the first ring. Marcus, Jesus Christ, what did you do? You heard already? I shouldn't have been surprised. Sarah had eyes and ears everywhere, especially in companies we owned. I have 6 emails from Richard Castellano, each more panicked than the last. Something about you crashing Janet's promotion party and claiming to own the company. Please tell me this is some kind of weird joke. Not a joke. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Flat, mechanical. It happened. All of it. Silence on the other end. Then, oh, Marcus. Oh, honey. The sympathy in her voice almost broke me. Sarah was 5 years older, had basically raised me after Mom died when I was 14. She knew about the deal Janet and I had made, had warned me, actually, that living a double life, even with good intentions, would eventually blow up in my face. She'd been right. She usually was. Tell me everything, she said. So I did. Pulled over properly, put the car in park, and told her about arriving early, about hiding behind the column, about Richard's speech and Janet's confession and the laughter that had felt like knives, about walking onto that stage and detonating the truth like a bomb. Holy shit, Sarah breathed when I finished. You actually did it. You actually told them. Seemed like the right moment for honesty. Marcus, this is... She paused. I could hear her moving, probably going somewhere private. Sarah worked from home mostly, from the brownstone in Brooklyn she shared with her husband David and their 2 kids. This is going to have consequences. Big ones. Not just for Janet, but for you, for the company, for everything. I know. Do you? Her voice was sharp now, sliding into CEO mode. Marcus, you just publicly humiliated the director of operations of one of our subsidiary companies. You exposed your identity after spending a decade being anonymous. Every decision you make from here on out is going to be scrutinized. Every business move will be questioned. People will wonder what else you've been hiding. Competitors will smell blood in the water. Good. Another pause. Good. I'm tired. Sarah. The words came out before I could stop them, raw and honest. I'm so fucking tired of pretending, of being small, of making myself less so that other people can feel bigger, of apologizing for existing in a way that makes people uncomfortable. You never apologized for anything, Sarah said softly. That was the problem. You just disappeared, tried to make yourself invisible. And Janet... She stopped, then continued carefully. Janet took advantage of that, didn't she? Yeah. I laughed, but it hurt coming out. Yeah, she did. What do you need from me? That was Sarah. No judgment, no I told you so, just straight to solutions. It was why she was so good at her job, why our grandfather had left her in charge of operations while leaving me my shares with no strings attached. He'd known I didn't want the responsibility, that I'd spent my whole life watching what money and power did to people and wanting no part of it. Funny how that worked out. I need you to do nothing, I said. Don't fire Janet. Don't interfere with Castellano Industries. Let everything play out naturally. Marcus, I mean it. What happens next needs to happen without your intervention. This isn't about revenge. Not really. It's about truth, consequences, reality finally catching up to the story we've all been telling. I could hear her thinking, the gears turning. Sarah understood chess, understood that sometimes the most powerful move was the one you didn't make. Okay, she said finally, but I want you to come to the city. Stay with us for a few days. You shouldn't be alone right now. I'm not ready to talk about it, not beyond what I just told you. Then don't talk. Come eat David's cooking, let the kids climb all over you, sleep in a bed that isn't the one you shared with her. Just be around people who love you, the real you, not the version you were performing. The real me. Did I even know who that was anymore? I'll think about it, I said. Marcus, I promise, I'll think about it. We said our goodbyes, and I sat there in the rest stop parking lot, watching moths throw themselves at the fluorescent lights with the kind of persistence that looked a lot like insanity. My phone buzzed again, another call from Janet, then a text. Janet, please come home. We need to talk. Then another. Janet, I can explain everything. It's not what you think. And another. Janet, Marcus, please, I love you. This is all just a huge misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Right. I'd misunderstood the words that came out of her mouth, the laughter she'd encouraged, the contempt in her voice when she'd called me a burden she was done carrying. I started typing a response, deleted it, started again, deleted it again. Finally, I wrote, Stay at the house tonight. I'll collect some things tomorrow when you're at work. We'll talk through lawyers. I sent it before I could second-guess myself, then immediately turned off my phone. The silence was absolute. I drove for another hour before I ended up at a place I hadn't visited in years, my grandfather's house in the Berkshires. It wasn't technically mine. Sarah and I co-owned it, kept it maintained but rarely used it. It was too big, too empty, too full of ghosts. But tonight, ghosts sounded better than the alternative. The key was still under the third flower pot on the back porch, right where it had always been. Inside, the house smelled like dust and memories and the particular stillness that comes from places where people used to live but don't anymore. I didn't turn on most of the lights, just made my way by moonlight through the familiar rooms until I reached my grandfather's study. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. Sarah had wanted to clear it out, donate the books, repurpose the space. I'd asked her not to. Couldn't explain why, exactly. Just knew that I needed this room to exist, frozen in amber, a monument to the man who'd taught me everything I knew about being human. I sat in his chair, old leather, worn smooth by decades of use, and looked at the photographs on the walls. Thomas Morrison, my grandfather, shaking hands with presidents and CEOs, cutting ribbons at factory openings, accepting awards for philanthropy. But my favorite photo wasn't any of those. It was a small one, tucked in the corner of a bookshelf. Grandpa Tom in coveralls, teaching a young version of me how to change the oil in his old Chevy pickup. You were right, I said to the empty room, to the ghost of the man who'd loved me unconditionally. You told me that pretending to be something I wasn't would poison everything eventually. That authenticity was the only foundation worth building on. The room didn't answer, but I could almost hear his voice anyway, that gruff warmth he'd had. So what are you going to do about it, boy? What was I going to do? I'd burned down my marriage in spectacular fashion. That was done. Irreversible. The ashes still smoking. But what came next? Did I slink back into anonymity, let the scandal die down? Go back to teaching literacy classes and pretending the last 12 years hadn't been an elaborate exercise in self-deception? Or did I do something different? I pulled out my laptop. I'd grabbed my work bag from the car, Habits Die Hard, and opened it up, logged into the secure server where I could access Morrison Global's internal systems. Sarah had given me full access years ago, even though I rarely used it. Told me it was important that I understand what we owned, what our money touched, what our decisions affected. I pulled up the file on Castellano Industries. The company employed 847 people across 3 locations. Annual revenue of $340 million, profit margin of 18%. They manufactured industrial components, the kind of unglamorous but necessary parts that kept other factories running. Richard Castellano Sr. had built it from scratch, taken it public, then sold controlling interest to us in 2011 when he'd needed capital to expand overseas. Richard Jr., the man who'd called me a golden retriever from the stage, was the current president, hired by his father, kept on by Sarah because he was competent enough, and the company was profitable enough that it wasn't worth the disruption of replacing him. Janet was his director of operations. Had been for 3 months, officially, though she'd been doing the job for 6 months before the promotion came through. Her personnel file showed consistent, excellent performance reviews, innovative thinking, strong leadership, results-driven. She was good at her job. I'd never doubted that. I scrolled through the org chart, looking at names and titles and salaries. Wondered how many of these people had been at the party tonight. How many had laughed. How many were lying awake right now, wondering if they still had jobs come Monday morning. My phone was still off, but I could imagine the panic, the scrambling, the frantic Google searches as people tried to figure out who Marcus Morrison actually was, what his involvement with the company meant for them, whether the simple janitor's revenge would include mass firings and corporate restructuring. I could do that. Could call Sarah right now, ask her to clean house, fire everyone who'd laughed, demote Richard, make an example of Janet. Could wield my power like a weapon, prove that I was somebody, that I mattered, that you didn't mock what you didn't understand. But that's not what Grandpa Tom would have done. I closed the laptop. Power used for revenge was still just power, and I'd spent my whole life trying not to be the kind of person who needed to prove themselves through dominance. The truth was already out there now, spreading like ripples on water. What happened next would happen regardless of what I did. Sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was nothing at all. I spent the night in my grandfather's study, dozing in his chair, dreaming of champagne and chandeliers and the sound of my wife's laughter at jokes made at my expense. When I woke up, the sun was streaming through the windows, painting everything gold. My phone was still off. The world had ended last night, but morning came anyway. It always did. I made coffee in my grandfather's kitchen. The beans were stale, but the ritual was comforting, and stood at the window, looking out at the Berkshire Mountains. Somewhere out there, Janet was waking up in our house, probably panicking, probably already meeting with lawyers. Somewhere, Richard Castellano was fielding calls from board members and investors. Somewhere, my story was being told and retold, each version a little different, a little more dramatic. But here, in this quiet house full of ghosts and memories, I was just Marcus, not a janitor, not a millionaire, not a wronged husband or a humiliated fool, just a man who'd spent 12 years trying to be someone he wasn't, married to a woman who'd grown to despise him for it. Just a man who was finally, terrifyingly, free. I picked up my phone, turned it on, watched the notifications flood in, calls, texts, emails, all of it noise and panic and other people's problems. I deleted all of it without reading. Then I called Sarah back. "I'm ready," I said when she answered. "Ready for what?" "To stop hiding, to be who I actually am, to figure out what that means." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "It's about damn time, little brother." "Yeah," I said, looking out at the mountains, at the morning light turning everything new. "Yeah, it is." The first chapter of my old life had ended in a hotel ballroom full of laughter and lies. The first chapter of whatever came next was beginning here, in a quiet house in the Berkshires, with stale coffee and sunlight and the ghost of my grandfather's approval hanging in the air like a benediction. I didn't know what happened next, but for the first time in 12 years, I was ready to find out. The drive back to Westchester on Saturday afternoon felt like traveling through someone else's life. Everything looked the same exit off I-84, the same Starbucks on the corner where Janet and I used to get coffee on Sunday mornings, the same tree-lined streets with their perfect lawns and their SUVs parked in driveways like promises of suburban normalcy. But I was different now. The man who'd left this neighborhood yesterday morning in his navy suit, trying to be small enough to fit his wife's narrative, was gone. I didn't mourn him. Janet's car wasn't in the driveway when I pulled up. Good. I'd told her I'd come while she was at work, though technically it was Saturday and she shouldn't be working. But old habits, right? Or maybe she was at Richard Castellano's office doing damage control. Maybe she was at a lawyer's office already, figuring out how to spin this, how to protect herself. Didn't matter. I wasn't here for her. I let myself in through the front door. My key still worked, that small mercy, and stood in the entryway for a moment, just breathing. The house smelled like Janet's perfume and the vanilla candles she loved, and something else, something I couldn't quite name. Sadness, maybe. Or just the particular emptiness that comes from realizing you've been living in a museum to a marriage that died without you noticing. Nothing had changed since yesterday morning. The kitchen was still pristine, all granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that we'd picked out together 4 years ago during the renovation. Janet had wanted top-of-the-line everything. I'd suggested we could get perfectly good appliances for half the price. She'd given me that look, the one I now recognized as disappointment wrapped in patience, and said, "Marcus, we can afford it. Stop acting like we're poor." But we were poor, according to the story we were living. We were a business executive and a janitor, scraping by, making it work. Except she'd wanted the granite and the stainless steel and the wine fridge and the Italian tile, and I'd said yes because I loved her, and because I had the money, and because what was the point of having it if I couldn't make her happy? The photos were still on the walls. Our wedding day, both of us so young, so hopeful. Janet had worn her grandmother's veil, something borrowed, something blue. I'd cried when she walked down the aisle. Not performance tears, not duty tears, but real ones. Because I'd felt like the luckiest man alive. Our honeymoon in Thailand. That trip to Paris for our 5th anniversary. Last year's Christmas card photo, both of us in matching sweaters that Janet had insisted on, her idea of ironic holiday cheer. In every photo, I was smiling. In most of them, Janet was too. But now, looking at them with new eyes, I could see it. The way she angled herself slightly away from me. The way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes in the more recent ones. The way she looked at the camera like she was posing for evidence of happiness rather than actually experiencing it. How long had she been unhappy? How long had I been the burden she'd described so eloquently to a room full of strangers? I went upstairs to our bedroom. My bedroom, I guess, since she'd apparently already checked out emotionally. Started pulling clothes from the closet, stuffing them into the suitcase I'd pulled from under the bed. I didn't need much. Most of my wardrobe was deliberately modest anyway. Jeans, t-shirts, a few button-downs, the suits I wore when I had to attend Morrison Global board meetings that I'd always told Janet were adult education conferences. Another lie, another brick in the wall we'd built between us. I was folding a sweater when I heard the front door open. My whole body went rigid. She wasn't supposed to be here. We weren't supposed to do this, not yet, not when everything was still too raw, too fresh, too fucking painful. "Marcus?" Her voice floated up the stairs, tentative, small, nothing like the confident woman who'd told a ballroom full of people that her husband was holding her back. I didn't answer, just kept packing. Footsteps on the stairs, Then she was in the doorway, and I made myself look at her. She looked terrible, still beautiful. Janet would probably look beautiful at her own funeral, but terrible. No makeup, her eyes red and swollen, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was wearing yoga pants and one of my old college sweatshirts, the Stanford one I'd thought I'd lost years ago. "You weren't supposed to be here," I said. My voice came out flat, emotionless, a stranger's voice. "I know. I'm sorry, I couldn't stay away. I needed to see you, to talk to you." She took a step into the room, then stopped when she saw my expression. "Please, Marcus, please just let me explain." "Explain what exactly?" I turned back to the suitcase, adding the sweater to the pile. "Explain how you accidentally told a room full of people that I'm barely literate. Explain how you somehow unintentionally described me as an embarrassing burden you're done carrying. Which part needs explaining, Janet?" "It wasn't—" She stopped, took a breath. I could hear her gathering herself, sliding into the professional demeanor she used in difficult negotiations. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Richard, he'd had too much to drink, and he started in on that story, and I should have stopped him. I know I should have. But everyone was laughing, and I panicked. I went along with it. It was easier than explaining the truth." I zipped the suitcase closed, turned to face her fully. "The truth being that you're married to someone whose family is worth more than everyone at that party combined? That truth?" "You wanted to be anonymous." Her voice rose, defensive now. "You made me promise not to tell anyone who you really were. You said you wanted a normal life, a normal marriage, that you didn't want people treating you differently because of your money. So I didn't tell them. I kept your secret. And then over time, I had to fill in the gaps, make up stories about what you did, where you worked. I had to create a whole narrative to explain why my husband never came to company events, why you didn't understand my work, why we lived in a nice house, but not too nice, why we had one car that was decent, but not flashy. So you made me a janitor who can barely read." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That was your solution? To make me sound pathetic?" "I didn't mean—" She pressed her hands to her face. "It started small, little things. I told someone you worked in building maintenance because I couldn't explain why you volunteered at that community center. Then someone else asked what you did there, and I said you helped with cleaning because I didn't want to get into the literacy program thing, and then it just snowballed. Every lie built on the last one until the story became bigger than the truth. And you never once thought to stop lying, to just tell people I worked in investment management or finance or literally anything closer to the truth." "I couldn't." She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "Don't you see? By the time I realized how bad it had gotten, I was in too deep. If I'd suddenly changed my story, people would have known I'd been lying. They would have questioned everything. My credibility would have been destroyed. So instead, you destroyed me." The words hung between us like a physical thing. Janet flinched, as if I'd slapped her. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. "Marcus, you have to believe that. I love you. I've always loved you. You have a funny way of showing it." I picked up the suitcase, hefted it off the bed. "The woman I heard last night, the one who said she was done pretending I was enough, she didn't sound like someone in love. She sounded relieved, like she'd finally gotten permission to say out loud what she'd been thinking for years. That's not fair." "No." I set the suitcase down, took a step toward her. "Tell me, Janet, when did it start? When did you stop seeing me as your husband and start seeing me as dead weight? Was it when you got promoted to manager? When you started making 6 figures? When Richard Castellano started paying attention to you?" Her face went pale. "What are you—" "Oh, please." I was surprised by the bitterness in my own voice. "I saw how he looked at you last night, how you looked at him. You think I'm stupid? Actually stupid, not pretend janitor stupid? I've watched you pull away from me for 2 years, Janet. I've watched you stay late at work more and more often. Watched you take weekend trips for conferences that you barely talked about when you got home. Watched you stop touching me unless I touched you first. And even then, you'd tolerate it rather than welcome it. Marcus, are you sleeping with him? Silence, but her face told me everything I needed to know. Jesus Christ. I actually staggered, like the confirmation had physical weight. I'd suspected, of course. Had suspected for months, but suspicion and confirmation were two different animals entirely. How long? We're not. She was crying harder now, gasping between words. It only happened a few times. It didn't mean anything. It was just, he was there, and he understood what I was dealing with. And you were always so distant, so checked out. And I just needed, don't. I held up my hand. Don't you dare try to make this my fault. Don't you dare tell me that you cheated because I was distant when the reason I was distant was because you'd been pulling away from me for years. When I was giving you space because I thought that's what you needed. When I was supporting your career and your ambitions and your late nights because I thought I was being a good husband. You were. She reached for me, and I stepped back. You are. Marcus, you're the best man I've ever known. That's what makes this so hard. That's what makes this so... She broke off, sobbing. So what? So tragic? So complicated? I shook my head. It's actually pretty simple, Janet. You wanted a different life than the one we agreed to. You wanted the prestige and the power and the guy in the corner office more than you wanted the guy who taught immigrants how to read. And instead of being honest about that, instead of telling me the truth and letting us figure out if our marriage could survive it, you made me into a joke. You made me into something you could mock and dismiss and eventually discard. I never wanted to discard you. Then what did you want? Because from where I'm standing, you wanted me to disappear, to be small and quiet and out of the way so you could focus on becoming someone important without the inconvenience of a husband who didn't fit the narrative you were building. She was silent for a long moment, then so quietly I almost didn't hear it. Maybe you're right. The admission should have felt like vindication. Instead, it just felt empty. I need you to leave, I said. I'm going to pack a few more things, and then I'm leaving. I'll have my lawyer contact you about next steps. Next steps? Her voice cracked. Marcus, we can fix this. We can go to counseling. There's nothing to fix. I was amazed at how calm I sounded. You can't uncook an egg, Janet. You can't unsay those words. Every time I look at you from now on, I'm going to hear you telling a room full of strangers that I'm holding you back. I'm going to see you laughing while your boss calls me a golden retriever. I'm going to know that you've been sleeping with him, that you've been living a double life while accusing me of the same thing. Please. She was on her knees now, literally begging. Please don't do this. I know I fucked up. I know I hurt you, but we've been together for 12 years. That has to mean something. That has to be worth fighting for. I looked at her, really looked at her, and tried to find the girl I'd fallen in love with in college. The one who'd laughed at my terrible jokes and debated philosophy with me until 3 a.m. and told me she didn't care about my money, she just wanted me. She was gone. Had been gone for a while, probably. I'd just been too busy pretending everything was fine to notice. It does mean something, I said softly. It means that this hurts, worse than anything I've ever felt. It means that I'm going to spend the next, however long, grieving not just for our marriage, but for the version of you I thought I knew. It means that I loved you, really loved you, and that makes what you did so much more devastating than if you were just some stranger who mocked me at a party. I picked up my suitcase again. But it doesn't mean I'm going to stay. It doesn't mean I'm going to give you another chance to make me small. I've spent 12 years trying to be the right size for you, Janet. Trying to be unobtrusive and supportive and understanding. And you know what I learned last night? She shook her head, tears streaming. I learned that no matter how small I made myself, it was never going to be enough. Because the problem wasn't my size. It was that you wanted someone else entirely. I walked past her, out of the bedroom, down the stairs. She followed me, still crying, still pleading. Marcus, wait. Please. Can you just stay in town, stay somewhere close so we can talk, so we can figure this out? I stopped at the front door, turned back one last time. I'm going to stay with my sister in Brooklyn for a while. My lawyer will be in touch about dividing assets and filing paperwork. Until then, the house is yours. Keep living the life you wanted. Date Richard openly if that's what you want. Get another promotion. Be successful. Be happy. How can I be happy without you? The question might have moved me yesterday. Today, it just sounded like more manipulation, more performance. I don't know, Janet, but that's not my problem anymore. I walked out into the October afternoon. The sun was shining. Somewhere, a neighbor was mowing their lawn. Everything was achingly, painfully normal. I loaded my suitcase into the Audi, started the engine. Janet stood in the doorway of our house, her house now, I supposed, watching me leave. I didn't wave, didn't look back as I pulled out of the driveway. In the rearview mirror, I could see her collapse against the doorframe, her whole body shaking with sobs. I felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart. That had already shattered last night. This was something else. The last thread of connection, maybe. The final strand of hope that maybe, somehow, we could salvage something from the wreckage. It snapped cleanly. I turned on the radio. Some pop song I didn't recognize filled the car. I didn't turn it off, didn't change the station, just let the noise fill the space where my marriage used to be. The drive to Brooklyn would take about an hour in Saturday traffic. 60 minutes to figure out who I was now. 60 minutes to start building a life that didn't require me to be someone I wasn't. 60 minutes to start learning how to be Marcus Morrison instead of Marcus the janitor. I merged onto the highway, leaving Westchester and its perfect lawns and its perfect lies behind. My phone rang. Janet, probably. I didn't check, just let it ring itself out. Then it rang again, and again. Finally, at a red light, I glanced at the screen. Not Janet. A number I didn't recognize. New York area code. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mr. Morrison? A woman's voice, professional, slightly nervous. This is Amanda Chen from the New York Times business desk. I was hoping you might have a few minutes to talk about the incident at Castellano Industries last night. We're running a story on Monday, and I wanted to get your side of... I hung up. The light turned green. I drove. My phone rang again. Different number. I didn't answer. Then a text from Sarah. The press is calling. Don't talk to anyone. Come straight here. We need to strategize. Strategize. Right. Because my private humiliation was now public news. Because the story of the janitor who owned the company was too good for the media to ignore. Because my pain was about to become entertainment for strangers who didn't know me and didn't care. Another text, this time from a number I did recognize. Richard Castellano. Richard. Mr. Morrison, I owe you a profound apology. I had no idea who you were, and my comments last night were completely inappropriate. I hope we can discuss this privately and come to an understanding. I value my position at Castellano Industries and would hate for this unfortunate misunderstanding to impact the company or its employees. Misunderstanding. Everyone kept calling it that, as if I'd misunderstood the laughter, misunderstood the contempt, misunderstood my wife telling the world I was holding her back. I didn't respond. The highway stretched ahead of me, cars and trucks and the ordinary traffic of Saturday afternoon. Somewhere in this mess of vehicles were people living their own dramas, carrying their own secrets, navigating their own betrayals. I was just one more broken heart in a city full of them. But I was also Marcus Morrison, grandson of Thomas Morrison, majority shareholder in a portfolio worth billions, a man who'd spent a decade hiding his light under a bushel because he'd been taught that humility was a virtue. Grandpa Tom had also taught me something else, though, something I'd forgotten somewhere along the way. He'd taught me that there was a difference between humility and self-erasure. Humility meant not thinking you were better than others. Self-erasure meant pretending you were less than you were. I'd been erasing myself for 12 years. Maybe it was time to stop. Sarah's brownstone in Park Slope was exactly what you'd expect from someone who ran a multi-billion-dollar investment firm but refused to be ostentatious about it. Elegant but not showy. Historic but modernized. The kind of place that whispered old money rather than screaming new wealth. I'd always loved this house, loved the way it smelled like Sarah's jasmine tea and her husband David's cooking, and the particular chaos that came with 2 kids under 10. I parked on the street. Miracle of miracles, I found a spot only 2 blocks away and sat there for a moment, gathering myself. Through the front window, I could see movement. Sarah probably pacing while on the phone. She paced when she was strategizing, wore paths in expensive rugs while dismantling problems piece by piece. My phone had been buzzing nonstop for the last hour. More reporters, more unknown numbers. 3 more texts from Richard Castellano that got progressively more desperate. I'd turned off notifications somewhere around the Brooklyn Bridge, but I could still feel the weight of all those unanswered messages, all those people wanting a piece of my story. The front door opened before I could knock. Sarah stood there, barefoot despite the October chill, wearing jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her hair was up in a messy bun, and she had that look on her face, the one that meant she'd already gamed out 17 different scenarios and was 3 moves ahead of everyone else. "Get in here," she said, pulling me into a hug before I'd even cleared the threshold. "You look like hell." "I feel like hell." "Good. You should." She pulled back, studied my face. "But you're still standing, which means you're stronger than you think you are." David appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He was a food writer, one of those rare people who'd married into money and genuinely didn't care about it. He and Sarah had met at a charity event where he'd been covering the food for a magazine piece, and she'd been representing Morrison Global. They'd bonded over their shared disdain for pretentious appetizers and gotten married 8 months later. "Marcus." He gave me the kind of hug that men give each other when words won't cut it. Firm, brief, loaded with unspoken support. "I made lasagna. You're eating. No arguments." "Where are the kids?" I asked, looking around for my niece and nephew. "Upstairs with a movie and strict instructions not to bother Uncle Marcus unless the house is literally on fire," Sarah said. "We need to talk, and we need to do it without interruptions." She steered me into the study, a smaller, cozier version of Grandpa Tom's, with the same leather chairs and the same smell of old books and furniture polish. David disappeared, then returned with 3 glasses of wine and the promise that dinner would be ready in 20 minutes. "Okay," Sarah said, settling into the chair across from me. "Tell me everything that's happened since we talked last night. Don't leave anything out." So I did. Told her about the rest stop, about sleeping in Grandpa's study, about going back to the house and finding Janet there, about the confrontation, about her admission that she'd been sleeping with Richard Castellano, about the moment I'd finally accepted that my marriage was truly, irretrievably over. Sarah listened without interrupting, her face carefully neutral, but I knew her well enough to see the anger building behind her eyes. When I finished, she took a long sip of wine and said, very calmly, "I'm going to destroy her." "Sarah." "No, I mean it. Not just her. Richard Castellano, too. Both of them. They humiliated you publicly, Marcus. They made you a laughingstock in a room full of industry professionals. And now the story is everywhere. Do you know how many calls I've gotten today? How many emails?" "I can imagine. The Wall Street Journal wants an interview. Bloomberg is running a profile on you Monday morning, with or without your cooperation, they said. Someone leaked video from the party. It's on YouTube. It has 2 million views. I felt the blood drain from my face. Video? Someone was filming on their phone during the speeches. It's not great quality, but it's clear enough. Richard's comments, Janet's response, your revelation, all of it. The comments section is... She paused. Well, they're mostly on your side, if that's any consolation. A lot of people calling Janet and Richard out. Some people are even saying you should fire everyone who laughed. I don't want to fire anyone. I know. That's why you're a better person than me. Sarah leaned forward. But Marcus, we need to get ahead of this. We need to control the narrative before it controls us. Morrison Global's reputation is on the line here. Our investors are nervous. Our board is asking questions. We need a unified response. What kind of response? That depends on what you want. She pulled out her iPad, started scrolling through what looked like notes. I've been working on a few options. Option 1. We go full transparency. You give one big interview to someone reputable. I'm thinking 60 minutes, or maybe that journalist from the New Yorker who did the piece on tech billionaires last year. You tell your whole story, why you stayed anonymous, what your marriage was like, what happened at the party. Control the narrative by being the one to tell it. I shook my head. That feels like exploitation, making my personal pain into entertainment. Option 2. We say nothing publicly but make strategic moves privately. I start sitting in on Castellano Industries board meetings. We restructure their executive team. We make it very clear that there are consequences for what happened, even if we don't broadcast them. That's just revenge with extra steps. Option 3. She paused. Option 3 is the one I actually think you should consider. We use this moment to completely restructure how you engage with Morrison Global. You've been a silent partner for years, Marcus. You attend the bare minimum of board meetings. You rubber stamp my decisions. You collect your dividends and pretend you're not part of this empire. But you are. You own 35% of everything we touch. It's time to step up. I don't want to run companies, Sarah. That was never my thing. I'm not asking you to run anything. I'm asking you to be visible, to own who you are, to stop hiding. She set down the iPad. Grandpa Tom left you those shares for a reason. He believed in you, believed you had something valuable to contribute beyond just your name and your inheritance. But you can't contribute if you're pretending to be someone else. I wasn't pretending to be someone else. I was trying to be a normal person. You're not a normal person, Marcus. Neither am I. We were born into extraordinary circumstances, and we have extraordinary resources at our disposal. You can use those resources to teach literacy classes and help Mr. Chen change light bulbs. That's beautiful, and I respect it. But you can also use them to do more, to be more. I stood up, walked to the window. Outside, Park Slope was doing its Saturday evening thing. Parents pushing strollers, couples heading to dinner. The ordinary rhythm of urban life. What if I don't know how to be more? What if I've been hiding for so long that I've forgotten what it means to take up space? Then you learn. Sarah came to stand beside me. Look, I know this is scary. I know you built your whole identity around being humble and low-key and not drawing attention to yourself. But that identity got you a wife who was ashamed of you and a life where you had to lie about who you were just to feel normal. Maybe it's time to try something different. Like what? Like being honest. Like admitting you're Marcus Morrison, not Marcus the janitor. Like using your real name, engaging with the companies we own, having opinions about how our money gets invested and what our influence gets used for. Like being a full participant in your own life instead of a ghost haunting the edges of it. David knocked softly on the doorframe. Dinner's ready. And before you two get too deep into corporate strategy, I'm invoking the no business at the dinner table rule. Emma and Jacob are joining us, and they don't need to hear about board meetings and hostile takeovers while they're eating lasagna. Sarah laughed. Fair enough. Come on, Marcus. Food first. Existential crisis later. Dinner was exactly what I needed. Normal, noisy, Warm. Emma, who was 9, told me in excruciating detail about her school's production of Annie and how she'd gotten the role of orphan number 3, which was actually very important because she had 2 whole lines. Jacob, who was 6, was more interested in showing me his new dinosaur book and explaining why the T-Rex wasn't actually the scariest dinosaur. That honor belonged to the Spinosaurus. I let their voices wash over me, let myself exist in this moment where I was just Uncle Marcus, beloved and welcome and not complicated. David's lasagna was perfect, layers of pasta and cheese and meat sauce that tasted like comfort. Sarah caught my eye across the table at one point and smiled, and I knew what she was thinking. This is what family looks like. This is what unconditional love looks like. This is what you deserve. After dinner, after Emma and Jacob had been herded upstairs for bath time, after David had cleaned up the kitchen and diplomatically given Sarah and me the study again, we got back to business. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told her, "about stepping up, about being visible. And I'm not ready for 60 minutes or a complete corporate restructuring, but maybe there's a middle path." I pulled out my phone, looked at the string of unanswered messages. What if I started small? What if I just showed up? Showed up where? Castellano Industries, Monday morning, not as an inspector or an avenger or whatever, just as a board member. As someone with a stake in the company who wants to understand how it operates. I scrolled to Richard's desperate texts. He wants to talk, to apologize. Fine, let's talk. But on my terms, in my context, with me being honest about who I am. Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering. That could work. It sends a message without being overtly aggressive. Shows you're engaged but not vindictive. Gives you a chance to see how things actually operate at that company. And it means I have to stop hiding, have to introduce myself as Marcus Morrison, acknowledge my role, be the person Grandpa Tom left his shares to instead of the person Janet wanted me to be. What about Janet? She works there. You'll have to see her. I know. The thought made my stomach clench. But maybe that's part of it. Maybe I need to stop running from uncomfortable situations, stop making myself small to avoid conflict. You're going to need support, someone to walk in there with you. Make it clear you're not alone, Sarah grinned. Lucky for you, I'm free Monday morning, and I've been wanting to tour Castellano's facilities anyway, due diligence and all that. You just want to watch Richard Castellano squirm. That too. She raised her wine glass. To showing up, to taking up space, to being exactly who you are without apology. I clinked my glass against hers. To new beginnings. We spent the next hour going over logistics. Sarah would arrange for us to visit Castellano Industries Monday morning, 10 a.m. She'd reach out to Richard directly, make it clear this wasn't optional. I would prepare a statement, nothing elaborate, just a brief explanation of who I was and what my role in the company entailed. We'd meet with key personnel, tour the facilities, make ourselves visible and real, and then we'd see what happened. You should get some sleep, Sarah said eventually, glancing at her watch. It was past 10. Guest room is made up. I put some of David's clothes in there in case you need anything. You two are about the same size. Sarah. I stopped her as she was heading for the door. Thank you for all of this, for letting me crash here, for helping me think through everything, for not judging me for how spectacularly I've fucked up my life. You didn't fuck up your life, Marcus. You trusted someone who didn't deserve it. That's not a character flaw. That's just bad luck. She came back, gave me another hug. Besides, you're my baby brother. Helping you is literally in my job description. Has been since you were 6 and I was 11 and you got your head stuck in the banister. I laughed, despite everything. I'd forgotten about that. Mom was so mad. Not at you, at Dad, for installing banisters with such wide gaps. She made him replace the whole staircase. Sarah pulled back. My point is, we've been taking care of each other our whole lives. That doesn't stop just because things get hard. After she left, I sat in the guest room for a long time, just thinking. The room was decorated in soothing neutrals, with a comfortable bed and blackout curtains, and absolutely nothing that reminded me of the house in Westchester or the life I'd left behind. My phone buzzed. Another text from Janet. Janet, please talk to me. Please. I know I don't deserve it, but I need to explain. I need you to understand that I never stopped loving you. That this wasn't about you not being enough. It was about me losing myself and not knowing how to find my way back. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me, the part that had loved her for 12 years, that had built a life with her, that still remembered what it felt like to wake up next to her and feel grateful, wanted to respond, wanted to give her a chance to explain, to apologize, to maybe find some kind of closure. But the rest of me, the part that was still hearing her laughter from that ballroom, was done. I typed out a response. I'll see you Monday at Castellano Industries. We can talk then if necessary, but only about work. Everything else goes through lawyers. I hit send before I could change my mind. Her response came immediately. You're coming to the office? Why? I didn't answer. Let her wonder. Let her spend the weekend anxious and uncertain, the way I'd spent the last 18 months sensing something was wrong, but not knowing what. Let her feel, for once, like she wasn't in control of the narrative. I plugged in my phone, set an alarm for 7 a.m., and lay down on the guest bed. Outside, Brooklyn hummed and murmured, 8 million people living 8 million different stories. Somewhere out there, video of my humiliation was being shared and commented on. Somewhere, reporters were writing articles about the mysterious Marcus Morrison, who'd been hiding in plain sight. Somewhere, Janet was probably crying or panicking or calling Richard to strategize. None of it touched me here, in this quiet room, in my sister's house, protected by people who loved me unconditionally. I closed my eyes. For the first time in months, maybe years, I slept without dreaming. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that October sometimes offers in New York. Sharp blue sky, leaves turning gold and crimson, air crisp enough to hurt your lungs. I stood in front of Sarah's full-length mirror, adjusting my tie for the third time, and barely recognized the man looking back at me. This wasn't the navy suit Janet had bought me, the one designed to be inoffensive and forgettable. This was one of the suits I kept in storage, the ones I wore to Morrison Global board meetings. Charcoal gray, custom tailored by a place in Milan that Sarah swore by, cut to fit my frame in a way that suggested both power and restraint. The shirt was crisp white, French cuffs, the cufflinks simple silver, a gift from Grandpa Tom on my 21st birthday. I looked like money, old money, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself because it's simply assumed. I looked like Marcus Morrison. The realization made my hands shake slightly as I finished with the tie. This was really happening. I was really going to walk into Castellano Industries, into the company I technically owned a controlling interest in, and claim my space. No more hiding, no more pretending, no more making myself smaller to fit someone else's narrative. You ready? Sarah appeared in the doorway, equally polished in a black pantsuit that probably cost as much as a used car. She had her game face on, the expression she wore when walking into hostile negotiations. No, I said honestly, but I'm doing it anyway. That's my boy. She handed me a coffee and a travel mug. David made it. 3 shots of espresso. You're going to need it. The drive to Castellano Industries headquarters in White Plains took 40 minutes, every one of which I spent trying not to think about what was waiting for me. Sarah drove her Tesla in silence, occasionally glancing over to make sure I hadn't jumped out at a stoplight. My phone had been mercifully quiet. I'd blocked most of the reporters' numbers over the weekend, but I could see the notifications piling up on Sarah's phone. The story wasn't dying down. If anything, it was gaining momentum. Bloomberg ran their piece this morning, Sarah said finally, breaking the silence. It's actually not bad. They focused on your philanthropic work, the literacy program, painted you as a humble billionaire who chose service over society. There's a quote from Mr. Chen, apparently someone tracked him down, calling you the kindest man he'd ever met. Great. So now I'm a saint instead of a janitor. Better than the alternative. She took the exit for White Plains. Just remember, you don't owe anyone an explanation. You don't owe them your story or your reasoning or your emotional labor. You show up, you be professional, you make it clear that you're engaged with the company, and you leave. That's it. What about Janet? What about her? I told her we'd talk if necessary, about work stuff. Sarah's jaw tightened. Then you talk about work stuff. You keep it professional. You don't let her manipulate you into a personal conversation. You remember that she made her choices, and now she gets to live with the consequences. We pulled into the parking lot of Castellano Industries at 9:47 a.m. The building was exactly what you'd expect from a mid-size manufacturing company. 3 stories of concrete and glass, functional rather than beautiful, surrounded by a parking lot full of sensible sedans and pickup trucks. A sign out front proclaimed, Castellano Industries, building America's future since 1987. Grandpa Tom had bought this company 14 years ago to keep it from going under, to save the 847 jobs that would have been lost if it had folded. He'd believed in American manufacturing, in keeping production domestic, in treating workers with dignity. He'd believed in a lot of things that seemed quaint now, in this age of quarterly earnings reports and shareholder value above all else. I wondered what he'd think of me, walking in here to reclaim space in a company he'd saved. Would he be proud, disappointed that it had taken a public humiliation to get me here? Stop overthinking, Sarah said, reading my expression. He'd be proud. You know he would be. We walked to the entrance together. Through the glass doors, I could see a small crowd gathered in the lobby. Word had clearly gotten out. Richard Castellano stood at the front, looking like he'd aged 5 years over the weekend. Next to him was an older man who had to be Richard Sr., the founder. Several other people in business attire clustered around them, all wearing expressions ranging from curious to terrified. And there, toward the back, trying to be invisible and failing completely, was Janet. Our eyes met through the glass. She looked exhausted, her makeup not quite hiding the dark circles, her posture rigid with stress. She was wearing her power suit, the burgundy one she saved for important presentations. Armor, I realized. She was wearing armor to face me. Sarah squeezed my hand once, briefly. You've got this. I pushed open the door. The lobby went silent. Every eye turned to us, and I could practically hear the mental calculations happening. Was this really him? Was this really the janitor who owned the company? He doesn't look like a janitor. He looks like, well, like them. Like someone who belonged in a boardroom. Richard Castellano stepped forward first, hand extended, smile fixed and desperate. Mr. Morrison, thank you so much for coming. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. And Sarah, Ms. Morrison Chen, what an honor. Sarah shook his hand with the warmth of someone handling a dead fish. Richard, shall we get started? I know Mr. Morrison's time is valuable. Of course. Of course. Please, right this way. I've arranged for us to use the executive conference room. I thought we could start with a tour of the facilities, then sit down and discuss. Actually, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. I'd like to address everyone first, if that's possible. Richard blinked. Everyone. Your leadership team, department heads, anyone who was at the party Friday night. I looked around the lobby. Is there a space where we could gather? This won't take long. I could see the panic in Richard's eyes. This wasn't part of his script. He'd probably planned a private meeting, a controlled conversation where he could apologize profusely and promise anything I wanted in exchange for keeping his job. A public address wasn't something he could manage or spin. The cafeteria, Janet said suddenly. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying. Probably had been. It's big enough for about 50 people. We could gather there. Richard shot her a look, gratitude mixed with irritation. Yes, the cafeteria. Good idea. I'll have my assistant send out a message, get everyone assembled. Say, 15 minutes? Perfect. I glanced at Sarah, who gave me the smallest nod of approval. We'll wait here. The next 15 minutes were excruciating. People kept coming up to introduce themselves, to shake my hand, to say things like, Mr. Morrison, I had no idea, and it's such an honor, and I'm so sorry about Friday night. Each interaction felt like a small performance. Everyone auditioning for the role of supportive employee who definitely didn't laugh. Janet stayed on the periphery, not approaching, just watching. I could feel her eyes on me constantly, could sense her trying to find a moment to talk. I didn't give her one. Finally, Richard's assistant, a nervous young woman named Michelle, announced that everyone was assembled. We made our way through the building, down a corridor lined with photos of Castellano Industries through the years. Richard Sr. cutting ribbons, workers on assembly lines, products being loaded onto trucks. A history of honest American manufacturing. The cafeteria was packed. I counted maybe 60 people, all standing because there wasn't enough room for everyone to sit. The crowd parted as we entered, creating a path to the front of the room. I could hear whispers, could see phones being discreetly raised to record. This would be on YouTube within the hour, I had no doubt. Sarah and I walked to the front together. I turned to face the room full of strangers who'd heard my wife mock me, who'd laughed at jokes made at my expense, who were now looking at me with expressions ranging from shame to curiosity to outright fear. I took a breath. Good morning, I said. For those of you who don't know me, which I imagine is most of you, my name is Marcus Morrison. I'm the majority shareholder of Morrison Global Investments, which owns the controlling interest in Castellano Industries. I'm also the husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, of Janet Morrison, your director of operations. And up until Friday night, most of you thought I was an illiterate janitor. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. I held up a hand. I'm not here to fire anyone. I'm not here to make threats or demands. I'm not even here to make you feel bad about what happened Friday night, though I suspect some of you already feel pretty terrible about it. I paused, made eye contact with a few people. I'm here because it's time I stopped hiding. I could see confusion on many faces. Sarah stood beside me, a silent pillar of support. My grandfather, Thomas Morrison, bought this company in 2011. He bought it because he believed in American manufacturing, because he believed that the 847 people who work here deserved to keep their jobs, and because he believed that profits weren't the only measure of a company's worth. He taught me that business should serve people, not the other way around. That wealth was a responsibility, not just a privilege. That who you are matters more than what you have. I walked a few steps to the right, then back. Movement helped me think. So I took his lessons to heart, maybe too much to heart. I decided I wanted to live a normal life, work a normal job, be a normal person. I didn't want people to treat me differently because of my last name or my bank account. I wanted to earn respect through my actions, not inherit it through my circumstances. I smiled, but there was no humor in it. The irony is that in trying to be authentic, I created the biggest lie of all. I pretended to be someone I wasn't, and the person closest to me, my wife, eventually came to believe the pretense more than the reality. I could see Janet at the back of the room, tears streaming down her face. Richard Castellano looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. What happened Friday night was humiliating. It was painful. It felt like being stripped naked in front of strangers and mocked for scars I didn't know I was showing. The room was absolutely silent now, but it was also clarifying. It showed me that hiding doesn't protect you. It just makes you smaller. It makes you vulnerable in ways you don't expect. It lets other people define who you are because you're too afraid to define yourself. I turned to look directly at Richard. Your comments Friday night were inappropriate and hurtful, but they were based on information given to you by someone you trusted, my wife. You didn't know the truth because I'd worked very hard to make sure no one knew the truth. So while I don't excuse what you said, I understand how it happened." Richard's relief was visible, but I wasn't done. "That said, going forward, things are going to be different. I'm going to be more involved with Castellano Industries, not running it. You have capable people for that, but engaged with it, understanding it, making sure it operates in accordance with the values my grandfather had when he bought it, making sure the 847 people who work here are treated with dignity and paid fairly and given opportunities to grow." I looked around the room. "I'm going to be visible. I'm going to use my real name. I'm going to stop pretending I'm not who I am. And I expect the same from all of you. I expect honesty. I expect integrity. I expect that when you make decisions, you think about more than just profit margins. You think about people." Sarah stepped forward slightly, a signal we'd arranged. Time to wrap up. "I know many of you have questions. I know this is all very strange and probably scary. My sister and I will be touring the facility today, meeting with department heads, trying to understand how this company actually operates. If you want to talk to me, really talk, not just apologize. My door's open. Or it will be, once I figure out where my office is." That got a few genuine laughs. The tension in the room eased slightly. "One more thing," I said. "I want to be clear about something. My marriage ending, my personal drama, that's not this company's problem. That's between me and Janet and our lawyers. I don't want anyone here to feel like they need to take sides, or avoid her, or treat her differently because of what happened. She's good at her job. She earned her promotion through hard work and talent. Whatever else is true about our relationship, that's also true." I glanced at Janet. She was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Gratitude, maybe, or disbelief that I was being generous when I had every right to destroy her professionally. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you for listening. Now, I believe Richard promised us a tour. The room erupted in applause. Not everyone. Some people still looked uncomfortable or confused, but enough to make it clear that my message had landed. I'd claimed my space without being vindictive. I'd been honest without being cruel. I'd shown them who I really was. Sarah and I made our way back through the crowd. People reached out to shake my hand, to introduce themselves properly. I tried to remember names, to make real connections, to see these people as individuals rather than an audience. Janet intercepted us near the door. Up close, she looked even worse. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands trembling slightly. "Marcus, thank you for what you said. You didn't have to—" I said we'd talk about work if necessary. I cut her off gently. That wasn't about work. That was about basic decency. Don't read into it. I'm not. Can we please talk? Privately. Just for 5 minutes. Sarah put a hand on my arm, a silent warning. But I looked at Janet, really looked at her, and saw something I hadn't expected to see. Not manipulation, not performance, just genuine devastation. 5 minutes, I said, after the tour, in your office. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you, Marcus. We continued out of the cafeteria. Richard was waiting in the hallway, along with several department heads who'd introduced themselves in the lobby. He launched into tour guide mode, showing us the manufacturing floor, the quality control stations, the shipping department. He talked numbers and efficiency metrics and recent innovations in their production process. I tried to pay attention, tried to engage with the information, but part of my mind was stuck on that moment with Janet, on the 5 minutes I'd promised her, on the conversation I knew was coming. Sarah caught my eye at one point and mouthed, "You okay?" I nodded. I wasn't sure it was true, but I nodded anyway. The tour took 90 minutes. We met with the head of operations, not Janet, her assistant director, a competent woman named Maria Chen, who clearly ran the department while Janet handled the strategic planning. We visited the R&D lab, where engineers were developing new alloys for industrial applications. We talked to workers on the floor, people with grease under their fingernails and pride in their voices when they talked about the products they built. It was good work, honest work, the kind Grandpa Tom had believed in. Finally, inevitably, Richard led us back to the executive suite. "I've arranged for lunch to be brought in," he said. "Nothing fancy, just sandwiches from the deli down the street. I thought we could eat and discuss the quarterly reports, talk about strategic direction for the next fiscal year." "Actually," I interrupted, "I need to take care of something first. Janet and I need to have a brief conversation. Work-related," I added, seeing Sarah's expression. "We'll join you in about 15 minutes. Richard looked uncertain but nodded. "Of course. Janet's office is just down the hall, third door on the right." Sarah pulled me aside as Richard and the others headed toward the conference room. "Are you sure about this?" "No, but I promised her 5 minutes, and I don't break my promises, even to people who've broken theirs to me. I'll be right down the hall if you need me. And Marcus," she gripped my shoulder, "don't let her twist this into something it's not. You're being professional. That's all. This is." "I know." But as I walked down the hall toward Janet's office, toward the conversation I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure, I wasn't sure I knew anything at all anymore. I knocked on her door, heard her voice, thick with tears. "Come in." I opened the door and stepped into the next chapter of whatever this was becoming. Janet's office was smaller than I'd expected. Not tiny, but not the sprawling executive space I'd imagined for someone who'd just been promoted to director of operations. It was neat, organized, professional, a desk with 2 monitors, filing cabinets, a small conference table by the window. The walls held framed certificates, a few photos of company events, and one picture that made my chest tighten. Our wedding photo, the 2 of us laughing, young and hopeful and stupidly in love. She was standing by the window when I entered, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold her own pieces together. She'd been crying, was still crying actually, silent tears tracking down her face despite her obvious attempts to compose herself. "Thank you for coming," she said, not turning around. "I wasn't sure you would." I closed the door behind me, stayed near it. Keeping distance felt important. I said 5 minutes. I meant it. "Right, 5 minutes." She finally turned to face me, and the rawness in her expression was almost unbearable. This wasn't the polished executive who'd stood on that stage Friday night. This was just Janet, stripped of all armor, looking at me like I was the last solid thing in a world that had turned to quicksand. "I don't even know where to start." "Then don't." I kept my voice level, professional. "You asked to talk. I'm here. But I need you to understand something. This isn't a reconciliation. This isn't me giving you a chance to explain away what happened. This is 5 minutes of professional courtesy because we work for the same company and it would be stupid to pretend otherwise." She flinched. I know that's all this is. Marcus, what you said out there, about me being good at my job, about people not needing to take sides. You could have destroyed me. You could have told everyone about Richard and me, about the affair, about how I've been lying to them the same way I lied to you. But you didn't." "No, I didn't." "Why?" I moved further into the room, but still kept the desk between us. "Because destroying you doesn't undo what happened. It doesn't make me feel better. It doesn't change the fact that my marriage is over, or that I spent 12 years living a lie, or that the woman I loved told a room full of strangers I was holding her back." I paused, and because despite everything, despite the hurt and the anger and the betrayal, I still remember who you used to be, who I thought you were. That person didn't deserve to have her career ruined because her personal life imploded. "God, Marcus," she pressed her hands to her face. "How are you so good? How can you stand there and be decent to me when I've been so unforgivably cruel to you? I'm not being good. I'm being strategic. There's a difference." I pulled out one of the chairs at her conference table, sat down. Somehow, being seated made this feel less confrontational, more like a business meeting, which is what it was supposed to be. If I'd come in here today screaming for heads, demanding firings, wielding my ownership stake like a weapon, what would that accomplish? It would make me feel powerful for about 5 minutes, and then I'd have to live with being the kind of person who uses his wealth to punish people. That's not who I want to be. She sat down across from me, maintaining the distance. Who do you want to be? I don't know yet. It was the most honest thing I'd said all day. That's what I'm trying to figure out. All I know is that the version of myself I've been for the last 12 years, the one who made himself small, who hid who he was, who prioritized your comfort over his own identity, that version is done. I'm not going back to him. I never asked you to be small. Didn't you? I leaned forward. Think about it, Janet. Really think about it. Every time I suggested we use some of the family money for something, a nicer vacation, a better car, helping your parents with their medical bills, you shut it down. Said we needed to live on what we earned. Said you didn't want to rely on my inheritance like it was dirty money. Said you wanted to make it on your own. Because I did want that. I wanted to succeed because of my own merit, not because I married well. And I respected that, supported it even. But somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing the money as just something I happened to have and started seeing it as something shameful. Started seeing me as less than because I wasn't out there grinding in a corporate job like you were. Started resenting me for not being ambitious in the way you thought I should be. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was small. You're right. I did. I don't know exactly when it happened, but I started comparing you to the men at work, to Richard, to the other executives, to people who were driven and hungry and always pushing for more. And you seemed so content, so satisfied with your volunteer work and your literacy classes and your simple life. And I couldn't understand it. Because you'd forgotten who I actually was. You'd bought so completely into the story we were telling that you were the successful one and I was the simple one, that you couldn't see the reality anymore. I saw what I wanted to see, she admitted, what was easier to see. Because if I acknowledged who you really were, if I admitted that my husband was actually a Morrison, that he had more wealth and influence than I could ever achieve on my own, then what did that say about my success? Was I only in this position because I was married to you? Did people respect me for my work or for my connections? No one here knew you were married to me, I pointed out. You made sure of that. No one knew your real name, but people knew I was married, knew my last name was Morrison. And there were a few times, just a few, where doors opened a little easier than they should have, where Richard Sr. gave me opportunities that maybe I hadn't quite earned yet, where my suggestions were taken more seriously than they might have been otherwise. She met my eyes. I always wondered if the Morrison name carried weight, even when people didn't know the full story. If somehow, somewhere, the connection helped me. This was new information, and it hit differently than I'd expected. So you made me into a janitor in your stories to convince yourself, and everyone else, that you'd done it all on your own. That there was no possible way my family's influence could have helped you, because look how pathetic your husband is. That's ugly. Truth usually is. She stood up, paced to the window, wrapped her arms around herself again. What about Richard? The affair? Are you going to tell people? Are you still sleeping with him? No. God, no. I ended it Saturday night. Told him it was over. That it had been a terrible mistake. That I needed to focus on saving my marriage. She laughed bitterly. He wasn't happy. Said I was being irrational. That we were good together. That you and I were clearly wrong for each other if you'd hidden who you were from me. He said that? He said a lot of things. Most of them about how this was all your fault for lying to me, for putting me in an impossible position, for embarrassing him publicly. She turned back to face me. He's scared, Marcus. Terrified you're going to fire him. Terrified that Friday night ruined his career. He's been calling me all weekend, trying to strategize, trying to figure out how to do damage control. And what did you tell him? That I didn't know. That I had no idea what you were going to do because I clearly didn't know you at all. Her voice broke. And it's true. I thought I knew you. Thought I had you figured out. The sweet, simple guy who loved me and would always be there and would never push back or make waves or challenge me. But the man who walked onto that stage Friday night, who revealed who he really was without flinching, who's been walking around this building today like he owns it, because he does own it, that's not the man I thought I married. No, it's exactly the man you married. You just chose to ignore the parts that didn't fit your narrative. She sank back into her chair. I fucked up, Marcus. I know that. I know saying sorry isn't enough, isn't even close to enough. But I am sorry. I'm so desperately sorry that I let my insecurities and my ambitions and my need to prove myself turn into cruelty toward you. You didn't deserve that. You never deserved that. I looked at her, really looked at her, and tried to find anger, tried to stoke the rage that had been simmering since Friday night. But mostly what I felt was tired, sad, disappointed in both of us for letting it get to this point. I believe you're sorry, I said finally. I believe you never meant to hurt me, that it all just snowballed beyond your control, that you got caught up in the story and couldn't find your way back to the truth. But Janet, intention doesn't erase impact. You humiliated me. You betrayed me. You slept with another man and then stood on a stage and told people I was the problem in our marriage. I know. And I can't forgive that. Not right now. Maybe not ever. I can be professional with you. I can acknowledge that you're good at your job and treat you with basic respect. But I can't be your husband anymore. I can't go back to that house and pretend this didn't happen. I can't wake up next to you and not wonder what you're really thinking. Whether you're embarrassed by me, whether you're wishing I was someone else. Tears were streaming down her face now. What if I changed? What if I went to therapy, worked on my issues, figured out why I needed to make you small to feel big? What if I spent the next year proving to you that I can be better, that I can be the wife you deserved all along? Then you'd be doing it for you, not for me. Because we're done, Janet. The papers will be filed this week. We'll divide assets, figure out the logistics, be as amicable as two people can be when their marriage has imploded. But we're not going to therapy together. We're not working on us. There is no us anymore. Please. She reached across the table, tried to take my hand. I pulled back. Please, Marcus. Don't give up on us. Don't give up on 12 years. That has to mean something. It does mean something. It means I spent 12 years loving someone who was ashamed of me. It means I built a life on a foundation of lies and compromises and slow-burning resentment. It means I learned a painful lesson about what happens when you try to be someone you're not. I stood up. But it doesn't mean I'm going to keep making the same mistake. So that's it? You're just going to walk away? I already walked away. Friday night, when I left that ballroom. This is just me making it official. I moved toward the door, then stopped. For what it's worth, I meant what I said out there. You're good at your job. You should keep doing it. Richard might not survive this. That's between him and Sarah and the board. But you should be fine. Just do your work, keep your head down, and maybe think about getting some help. Figure out why you needed to tear someone else down to build yourself up. What about you? She asked. What are you going to do? I thought about that, about Sarah's words, about showing up, about taking up space, about Grandpa Tom and his belief that who you are matters more than what you have. About the last 12 years and the next 12 and all the years after that. I'm going to figure out who Marcus Morrison actually is, I said. Not Marcus the janitor. Not Marcus who's trying to be normal. Not Marcus who's hiding from his own life. Just Marcus. And then I'm going to be that person, unapologetically for the rest of my life. I hope you find him, Janet said softly. I hope he's everything you deserve to be. Me too. I opened the door, stepped into the hallway, and closed it behind me with a soft click. The finality of that sound, the gentle closing of a door on 12 years of my life, should have devastated me, should have brought me to my knees with grief. Instead, it felt like release. Sarah was waiting at the end of the hall, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. She raised an eyebrow as I approached. How was it? Exactly what I expected. Sad, honest, over. Good. She pushed off the wall. Richard has lunch set up in the conference room. Apparently, he's prepared a whole presentation on the company's strategic direction and wants your input. You up for it? I thought about saying no, about calling it a day, going back to Brooklyn, hiding in Sarah's guest room until the world stopped spinning. But that was old Marcus thinking. Small Marcus. The version of myself I'd left behind in that ballroom. Yeah, I said. I'm up for it. Let's go see what strategic direction looks like when you're not pretending to be someone else. We walked down the hallway together, sister and brother, Morrison and Morrison, exactly who we'd always been but had forgotten how to be. The conference room was crowded. Richard Sr., Maria Chen from operations, several other department heads I'd met during the tour. They all looked up when we entered, a mixture of nervousness and anticipation on their faces. Mr. Morrison, Richard said, standing. Please, sit here. He gestured to the head of the table, the power position. I looked at the chair, then at him. Actually, Richard, you sit there. You're the president. This is your meeting. Sarah and I are just observers today. The relief on his face was visible. I'd given him back some measure of control, some dignity. He nodded, sat down, and launched into his presentation. I listened, actually listened, not just waiting for my turn to talk, but genuinely trying to understand the business, the challenges, the opportunities. Asked questions when things didn't make sense. Offered thoughts when I had relevant experience from other Morrison Global companies. And somewhere in that conference room, surrounded by spreadsheets and strategic plans and people who'd laughed at me 3 days ago but were taking me seriously now, I felt something shift. Not healing. That would take longer. Not forgiveness. That might never come. But something like clarity. Something like purpose. I was Marcus Morrison. I owned companies. I had influence. I had resources. And it was time to stop apologizing for any of it. The meeting lasted 2 hours. When it finally broke up, Richard walked Sarah and me to the elevator. Thank you, he said quietly, for today, for giving us a chance to show you who we really are, for not coming in here swinging. I'm not interested in swinging, I told him. I'm interested in understanding, in making sure this company operates with integrity, in honoring what my grandfather built. We'll do our best to live up to that standard. He paused. And Mr. Morrison, for what it's worth, I am sorry, deeply sorry. What I said Friday night was inexcusable, regardless of what information I'd been given. I should have known better, should have been better. I nodded. Learn from it. Be better going forward. That's all any of us can do. In the elevator, Sarah waited until the doors closed before speaking. You handled that well. All of it. The address to the employees, the conversation with Janet, the meeting. Grandpa would be proud. Would he? Marcus, he'd be over the moon. You stepped up. You owned who you are. You used your power responsibly instead of destructively. That's everything he tried to teach us. The elevator reached the ground floor. As we walked through the lobby, I saw employees watching us, whispering. But it was different now. Not mockery or pity, but something closer to respect. We made it to the car. Sarah started the engine but didn't pull out of the parking spot yet. So what now? Now, I leaned my head back against the seat. Now I file for divorce. I start attending board meetings for all 17 Morrison Global companies instead of just rubber stamping decisions. I stop volunteering under a fake name and start using my real platform to do real good. I figure out what it means to be a Morrison in 2025 to... That's a good start. She pulled out of the parking lot, headed toward the highway. But what about the immediate future? Like, this week? This week I stay with you, if that's still okay. I talk to lawyers. I give one carefully chosen interview to set the record straight. Someone reputable. Someone who won't sensationalize. I start building a life that's actually mine, instead of some compromised version I thought would make other people comfortable. And Janet? I watched the Castellano Industries building disappear in the side mirror. Janet's not my problem anymore. She made her choices. Now she gets to live with them. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Mr. Morrison, this is Thomas Chen. You know my father. I heard what happened and wanted you to know that everyone at Bradford Community Center is proud of you. You taught us that dignity isn't about what you do, it's about how you do it. Thank you for teaching us. Thank you for being real. I showed the message to Sarah. She smiled. See, you've been being yourself all along. You just needed to stop hiding it. Maybe she was right. Maybe Marcus the volunteer and Marcus the Morrison weren't different people at all. Maybe they were just different facets of the same man, and I'd spent 12 years trying to keep them separate when I should have been integrating them. Maybe it was time to be whole instead of fractured. We drove back to Brooklyn in comfortable silence, the afternoon sun turning the city gold. Somewhere behind us, Janet was probably still crying in her office. Richard was probably still fielding angry calls from board members. The story of the janitor billionaire was probably still spreading across the internet. But here, in this car, driving toward a future I couldn't quite see yet, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt free. 3 weeks later, I sat in a studio apartment in Manhattan that had been converted into a makeshift interview space waiting for Rachel Morrison, no relation, to finish setting up her recording equipment. Rachel was a journalist for The Atlantic, known for her thoughtful, long-form pieces on wealth, power, and the American dream. When Sarah and I had discussed who should get the exclusive interview, Rachel's name had been at the top of the list. Almost ready, Rachel said, adjusting the microphone between us. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and an easy manner that probably made people forget they were being interrogated. Just want to make sure we get clean audio. This is going to be a podcast first, then we'll adapt it for print. Whatever works. I'd worn a simple button-down shirt, jeans, nothing flashy. Rachel had told me this wasn't about looking powerful. It was about being honest. I was trying. The 3 weeks since the Castellano Industries visit had been a blur. Divorce papers filed. Assets being inventoried by lawyers who looked physically pained when they calculated the numbers. My name appearing in business journals, gossip columns, even a segment on morning television where 2 hosts debated whether I was inspiring or weird for pretending to be a janitor. The video from Janet's party had been viewed 18 million times. 18 million people had watched my humiliation, my revelation, my breaking point. The comments were a mix of support. This man is a king. Criticism. Rich people are so weird. And the inevitable conspiracy theories. This whole thing is fake, staged, a PR stunt. I'd stopped reading them after the first few hundred. Okay, Rachel said, settling into her chair across from me. We're recording. Marcus Morrison, thank you for sitting down with me. Thank you for wanting to hear my side. Well, your story has captured a lot of attention. The billionaire who pretended to be a janitor, the wife who didn't know, or did know, depending on which version you read, the dramatic revelation at a corporate party. It's got all the elements of a great story. She leaned forward slightly. But I want to go deeper than the headlines. I want to understand why. Why hide who you were? Why maintain the fiction for so long? I'd prepared for this question, practiced it with Sarah, refined my answer, stripped it down to something that felt true. Because I was trying to escape a legacy I wasn't sure I wanted. My grandfather built Morrison Global from nothing. He was brilliant, driven, ruthless when he needed to be. My father inherited his role, but never his passion. He did the job competently, but died young, burned out, and unhappy. I looked at what that wealth and power had cost my family, and I wanted no part of it. So you ran away. I tried to. Went to college under my mother's maiden name, Bennett. Made friends who didn't know about the money. Met Janet, who I told on our third date, but who agreed to keep the secret. We built a life that felt normal, felt earned, felt like it was ours and not just handed to us. But it wasn't normal, Rachel said. You were living a double life. Going to board meetings as Marcus Morrison, then coming home and pretending to be Marcus the volunteer, Marcus the simple guy. Yes and no. The volunteer work was real. The literacy classes, helping at the community center, learning from Mr. Chen. All of that was genuine. I wasn't pretending to care about that work. I was pretending that it was all I did, all I was. Rachel made a note on her pad. Let's talk about Janet. You two were married for 12 years. At what point did the arrangement start to break down? This was harder. Talking about Janet still felt like pressing on a bruise. Gradually, she got promoted, started making good money, started moving in circles where people talked about business strategy and market trends. And I couldn't engage with those conversations without revealing who I really was. So I stayed quiet. Let her think I didn't understand. And over time, my silence became evidence of my simplicity in her mind. Did you ever try to tell her the truth? To say, actually, I do understand business. I own 17 companies. A few times, early on. But she'd get defensive, say I was being condescending, accuse me of trying to undermine her success. So I stopped. Learned to just smile and nod. And that became our dynamic. She was the smart one. I was the supportive one. She was ambitious. I was content. She was going places. I was stationary. That must have been lonely. The word hit me harder than I expected. Yeah, it was incredibly lonely. Being married to someone who sees a simplified version of you, who doesn't know or doesn't want to know the full truth. Having to edit yourself constantly, monitor everything you say to make sure you don't accidentally reveal too much. It's exhausting. Rachel nodded sympathetically. And then came the party. I took a sip of water, gathering myself. I wasn't supposed to be there early. Janet had told me to arrive late, after the important people had left, which should have been a red flag, honestly. Why was her husband not important enough to attend her celebration? But I showed up early anyway. Call it intuition. What was it like, hearing your wife describe you that way to a room full of people? I closed my eyes, and I was back there, behind the column, watching her laugh, hearing the contempt in her voice. It was like being flayed alive. Every word was a cut, and the worst part wasn't Richard's jokes or the crowd's laughter. It was Janet agreeing with it, amplifying it, saying I was holding her back, because that meant it wasn't just a performance for her. She believed it. So you revealed yourself. So I revealed myself, walked onto that stage and detonated the truth like a bomb. Not my finest moment, tactically. Sarah would have advised against it. But I wasn't thinking tactically. I was thinking, fuck this, fuck hiding, fuck being small. If they want to mock me, they should at least mock the real me. Rachel's eyes lit up. This was good material, the raw emotion she was looking for. How did it feel in that moment, walking up on stage? Terrifying, exhilarating, like jumping off a cliff and hoping there was water below instead of rocks. I'd spent a decade building this identity as normal Marcus, and I was about to destroy it in front of strangers who'd already decided I was pathetic. But you weren't pathetic. No, I was a lot of things. Cowardly, maybe, for hiding so long. Foolish for thinking the hiding could last forever. But not pathetic. And I needed them to know that. Needed Janet to know that. Rachel leaned back, studied me for a moment. There's been a lot of discussion online about whether your revelation was revenge, whether you humiliated Janet on purpose, as payback for her humiliating you. I've thought about that, I admitted. Wondered if I was being vindictive. But honestly, in that moment, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about truth, about finally, after 12 years, being honest about who I was. The fact that it humiliated Janet was a consequence, not the goal. Do you regret it? Did I? I'd asked myself that question 100 times in the past 3 weeks. I regret that it happened publicly. I wish I'd had the courage to end things privately, to walk away with dignity instead of making a scene. But I don't regret revealing the truth. That needed to happen. We couldn't keep building our lives on that foundation of lies. Rachel made another note. Let's talk about what happened after. You went to Castellano Industries, the company you own. You addressed the employees. You were, by all accounts, remarkably gracious given the circumstances. What was the alternative? Fire everyone? Destroy the company? Ruin Janet's career? I shook my head. My grandfather didn't buy that company to settle personal scores. He bought it to save jobs, to keep manufacturing in America, to build something that mattered. Using it as a weapon would have betrayed everything he stood for. But you did make changes. Richard Castellano is no longer president. That had been a harder decision than I'd expected. Richard Sr. retired 2 weeks ago. Richard Jr. was offered a generous severance package and asked to resign. It wasn't punishment for the party. It was because Sarah and I, in reviewing the company's operations, realized he'd been underperforming for years. The party just forced us to look more closely at what was happening there. And Janet? She's still director of operations. She's good at her job. That hasn't changed just because our marriage ended. I paused, chose my words carefully. I meant what I said at that company meeting. Personal and professional are separate things. She earned her position. She keeps it based on merit. Have you spoken to her since the divorce was filed? Once. Briefly. Her lawyer contacted mine about some asset division questions. We had a phone call to clarify things. It was civil. Sad, but civil. Do you still love her? The question caught me off guard. Rachel was good. She'd lulled me into feeling comfortable, then went straight for the jugular. I love who I thought she was. I love the memory of our early years, when things were simpler, and the lies hadn't compounded yet. But the woman who stood on that stage and said I was holding her back, I don't know her well enough to love her. That's a careful answer. It's an honest one. I met her eyes. Love isn't enough when it's built on deception, when one person is loving an illusion and the other person is tolerating a burden. We had 12 years of something, but I'm not sure it was ever really love in the way it should have been. Rachel nodded slowly. Let's shift gears. You've started being more visible in your role at Morrison Global, attending board meetings, getting involved in company decisions. What's that been like? Eye-opening, uncomfortable, necessary. I'd been dreading this part of my new life, but it turned out I was better at it than I'd feared. I spent so long avoiding this role that I'd convinced myself I'd be terrible at it. But it turns out that studying economics, watching how my grandfather operated, paying attention even when I pretended not to, all of that actually prepared me. I understand business. I understand people. I just needed to stop hiding those skills. Sarah Morrison Chen, your sister and the CEO of Morrison Global, has been very supportive. Sarah has been incredible. She could have been resentful. Here I come, the brother who's been checked out for years, suddenly wanting to be involved. but she's welcomed me, taught me, given me space to find my role. I'm lucky to have her. What is your role now? How do you see yourself functioning within Morrison Global? I'd been thinking about this a lot. Sarah is the operations expert. She runs things day to day, makes strategic decisions, manages the portfolio. I don't want to step on that or try to take over. What I bring is a different perspective. I've been on the ground level. I've worked with immigrants trying to learn English, elderly janitors with bad backs, people struggling to make ends meet. I understand what it's like to be at the bottom of the economic ladder, even if I was only visiting. So you see yourself as the conscience of the company, maybe, or just as someone who asks different questions. When we're making decisions about layoffs or wage structures or benefits packages, I'm the one who asks, how does this affect the actual people doing the work? I've been that person. I know what it feels like to be treated as expendable. But you weren't actually that person. You were always wealthy, always had a safety net. True. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I can't claim to fully understand the experience of people who live paycheck to paycheck because I've never actually faced that reality. But I can listen to them. I can amplify their voices in rooms where decisions get made. I can use my privilege to make things better for people who don't have it. Rachel was quiet for a moment then. Some people online have called you a hypocrite, said that you were basically poverty tourism, playing at being poor while sitting on billions. How do you respond to that? They're not entirely wrong. It hurt to admit, but it was true. I was privileged in ways I didn't fully acknowledge. I could walk away from the volunteer work whenever I wanted. I could quit if things got hard. I never worried about making rent or affording health care or any of the real struggles that the people I worked with faced daily. So yes, there was an element of tourism to it. An element of me getting to feel good about helping without actually experiencing the systems I was supposedly fighting against. But intention matters. Impact matters. The people I taught to read, the immigrants I helped study for their citizenship tests, Mr. Chen, who I helped with building maintenance, they didn't care that I was rich. They cared that I showed up, that I did the work, that I treated them with dignity. Maybe I was a hypocrite, but I was a hypocrite who actually helped people, and that counts for something. What happens now? Rachel asked. You're out as Marcus Morrison. You can't go back to being anonymous. How do you move forward? Honestly, I'm still figuring that out. I'm working with Sarah to establish a foundation focused on adult literacy and immigrant support. I'm getting more involved with Morrison Global's philanthropy arm, making sure our charitable giving actually goes to organizations that do meaningful work. I'm trying to use my platform, which I now have whether I wanted it or not, to talk about wealth inequality, about the responsibilities of the ultra-rich, about how we can build systems that work for everyone. That's a big agenda. It's the only agenda that makes sense. I spent a decade hiding from my privilege. Now I'm trying to own it, acknowledge it, and use it for something beyond just making more money. I paused. My grandfather used to say that wealth was a responsibility, not just an asset. I'm finally starting to understand what he meant. Rachel glanced at her notes. Last question, and it's a personal one. Are you happy? Was I happy? I thought about the past 3 weeks, the divorce proceedings, the media attention, the uncomfortable board meetings, the learning curve of being public, the grief of losing my marriage, even one that had been dying for years, the loneliness of living in Sarah's guest room, starting over at 40. But I also thought about teaching my first literacy class under my real name last week, about the board meeting where I'd successfully argued for raising wages at one of our manufacturing plants, about having dinner with Sarah and David and the kids, being Uncle Marcus without having to edit myself, about sleeping without the weight of secrets pressing down on my chest. I'm not happy yet, I said slowly, but I'm on my way to it. For the first time in years, I'm living authentically. I'm being who I actually am instead of who I thought I should be. And that's not happiness yet, but it's the foundation for it. It's honest. And after 12 years of lies, honesty feels like everything. Rachel smiled, clicked off her recorder. That's perfect. Marcus, thank you. This is going to be a powerful piece. When does it publish? Podcast goes live next Tuesday. Print version the following week. Are you ready for the response? Probably not, I admitted. But I don't think you're ever really ready for the internet to have opinions about your life. We shook hands and I left the studio apartment feeling lighter somehow. Like I'd confessed something I didn't know I needed to confess. Like maybe telling my story, the real story, not the headlines or the gossip or the video clips, might help someone else who was hiding, who was making themselves small, who was living a lie to keep the peace. My phone rang as I stepped onto the street. Sarah. How'd it go? She asked. Good. Hard. Honest. She asked tough questions. You didn't tell her about the affair, did you? We agreed to keep that private. I kept it private. Some things don't need to be public. I flagged down a taxi. I'm heading back to Brooklyn. Need anything? Just you, safely home, not giving any more impromptu interviews. She paused. Marcus, I'm proud of you, for doing the interview, for being honest, for stepping up. Grandpa would be proud too. Thanks, Sarah. That means a lot. I hung up and gave the taxi driver Sarah's address. As we pulled into traffic, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. I looked different somehow. Older maybe, or just more present, more there. Marcus Morrison looking back at Marcus Morrison. No pretense, no performance, no hiding. Just me, finally visible after a decade in the shadows. The city blurred past outside the window. Millions of people living millions of lives. Each one complicated and messy and real. I was just one more story in an endless collection of them. But it was my story now, and I was finally ready to own it. The interview with Rachel Morrison dropped on a Tuesday morning, and by Tuesday afternoon, my phone had become a weapon of mass distraction. Calls, texts, emails, social media notifications, they came in waves, relentless and overwhelming. Sarah had warned me this would happen, had suggested I turn off my phone entirely for the first 48 hours. I'd ignored her advice. Mistake. I was in Morrison Global's headquarters in Midtown. My first official day working from an actual office instead of Sarah's guest room, when the volume became unmanageable. My assistant, Patricia, Sarah had insisted I needed one, had hired her without consulting me, kept popping her head in with messages. Mr. Morrison, good morning, America wants you for Thursday. Mr. Morrison, someone from Harvard Business School wants to discuss a speaking engagement. Mr. Morrison, your wife, sorry, your ex-wife, her lawyer called, says it's urgent. That last one made me look up from the quarterly reports I'd been reviewing. Janet's lawyer? What does he want? Patricia consulted her notes. He didn't say, just that Ms. Morrison needs to speak with you directly, and it can't wait for the regular legal channels. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the one that came whenever Janet's name appeared in my world. We'd been so careful to keep things clean, to communicate only through lawyers, to maintain professional distance. What could possibly be urgent enough to break that protocol? Tell him I'll call him back within the hour, I said. Patricia nodded and disappeared. I sat there, staring at the reports without seeing them, wondering what fresh hell was about to unfold. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Have you listened to the interview yet? Rachel did a beautiful job. You sound human and honest and real. I hadn't listened to it. Couldn't bring myself to hear my own voice dissecting my failed marriage, my hidden identity, my complicated relationship with wealth. But Sarah was right. I should probably know what I'd actually said before the entire world formed opinions about it. I pulled up the podcast, put in my earbuds, and pressed play. Rachel's voice, warm and professional. Today on the Atlantic interview, Billionaire Marcus Morrison tells the story behind the viral video that's captivated millions. The night his wife publicly mocked him as an illiterate janitor, and he revealed he owned the company they both worked for. Then my voice, sounding more vulnerable than I remembered being, because I was trying to escape a legacy I wasn't sure I wanted. I listened to the whole thing, 53 minutes of my life distilled into narrative, edited for clarity and impact. Rachel had been fair, had let me tell my story without judgment, had asked hard questions, but given me space to answer honestly. The comments on the podcast platform were already in the thousands. This man is what every wealthy person should aspire to be. Finally, someone rich who admits their privilege and tries to do something with it. His wife is trash, and he deserves better. This whole thing sounds fake. Rich people love making themselves the victim. I closed the app, couldn't read anymore. The internet's opinions about my life were simultaneously validating and exhausting. An hour later, I called Janet's lawyer. "Mr. Morrison, thank you for returning my call." Richard Chen's voice was carefully professional, no relation to Mr. Chen from the community center, as it turned out, just one of the better family law attorneys in New York. "I apologize for the unorthodox approach, but Ms. Morrison asked me to reach out directly. What's this about?" "She'd like to meet with you, in person. Not about the divorce proceedings. Those are moving forward as planned. This is personal. She says there's something she needs to tell you that can't be said through intermediaries." Every instinct I had screamed no. Meeting with Janet alone for some mysterious conversation that couldn't go through proper channels. That was a trap. That was emotional manipulation. That was exactly the kind of thing I'd spent 3 weeks learning to avoid. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said. "I told her you'd say that." He sounded almost sympathetic. "For what it's worth, Mr. Morrison, I've been practicing family law for 20 years. I can usually tell when a client is being manipulative versus when they're genuinely struggling with something difficult. Your wife is struggling with something difficult. That's not my problem anymore. No, it's not. But she asked me to tell you that this is about your marriage, yes, but it's also about Castellano Industries, about information you deserve to have regarding the company's operations. She says you'll want to know this, even if you never speak to her again afterward." That changed things. If this was actually about the company, about something that affected Morrison Global's investment, then I had a fiduciary responsibility to listen. Damn it. "Fine. One meeting, somewhere public. Tomorrow, lunch at that cafe near Castellano's offices, the one on Mamaroneck Avenue. I'll let her know. Thank you, Mr. Morrison." After I hung up, I sat there for a long moment, trying to decide if I'd just made a terrible mistake. Probably. But Sarah had always said that running a company meant making decisions with incomplete information and living with the consequences. I texted Sarah, "Meeting with Janet tomorrow about company stuff. Supposedly, don't lecture me." Her response was immediate. "I'm going to lecture you so hard, but fine. Want me to come?" "No. I need to be able to do this myself." "Okay, but I'm tracking your location, and if you're there for more than an hour, I'm sending an extraction team." That made me smile despite everything. "You don't have an extraction team." "I'll hire one. Money can buy anything, remember?" The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and decisions and slowly learning the rhythms of being an active participant in Morrison Global. I met with the heads of 3 different portfolio companies, reviewed investment proposals for 2 more, and sat in on a conference call about a potential acquisition in the renewable energy sector. It was exhausting and exhilarating and completely terrifying. Every decision I made, or helped make, affected thousands of people. Jobs, livelihoods, communities. The weight of that responsibility was something I'd been avoiding for a decade, and now it was settling on my shoulders like a mantle I couldn't take off. That night, back at Sarah's brownstone, I found David in the kitchen making his famous mushroom risotto. The kids were already asleep, and Sarah was upstairs on a call with investors in Hong Kong. "Rough day?" David asked, not looking up from stirring. "Is it that obvious?" You have that shell-shocked expression Sarah gets after particularly brutal board meetings. He poured me a glass of wine without asking. "Drink this. Tell Uncle David what's wrong." I laughed, despite myself. David was only 3 years older than me, but he had this way of making everyone feel cared for. It was his superpower. "I'm meeting Janet tomorrow. She says she has information about Castellano Industries that I need to know." David's stirring slowed. "And you believe her?" "I believe her lawyer, who says it's legitimate business information." "But you don't trust her?" "No, I don't trust her." I took a sip of wine. "Which is why this is such a minefield. I need to be professional, need to hear what she has to say if it actually affects the company. But I also need to protect myself from whatever emotional manipulation might be happening. Can I give you some advice? As someone who has no stake in this whatsoever and just wants you to be okay." "Please." David set down his spoon, turned to face me fully. "Listen to what she has to say about the business. Take notes if you need to. Be professional and courteous. But the second she tries to make it personal, the second she starts talking about your marriage or what could have been or how sorry she is, you shut it down. You're not her husband anymore. You're not her friend. You're a stakeholder in a company where she's an employee. That's the only relationship you have now." It was good advice, clear, boundaried, exactly what I needed to hear. "When did you get so wise?" "I married your sister. You learn boundaries fast or you get steamrolled." He grinned. "She means well, but she's a force of nature." Sarah appeared in the doorway as if summoned. "I heard my name. Are you talking about how amazing I am?" "Always," David said, pulling her in for a kiss. "I was just telling your brother how to handle his meeting with Janet tomorrow." Sarah's expression shifted immediately from playful to serious. "You're really doing this?" "I'm really doing this. It's about the company. I have to." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, but I'm serious about tracking your location, and if you need an out, text me. I'll call with a fake emergency." "You two are very dramatic," I said. "We're very protective," Sarah corrected. "There's a difference." The next morning, I dressed carefully. Not the custom suit that screamed wealth, but not casual enough to suggest I didn't take this seriously. Business casual, professional but approachable. The armor of someone who knew his worth, but didn't need to flaunt it. I arrived at the cafe at 11:58 a.m. Janet was already there, sitting at a corner table, 2 coffee cups in front of her. She'd ordered for me, my usual, a cappuccino with extra foam. The gesture felt both intimate and presumptuous, a reminder of how well she knew me and how little that mattered now. She looked better than she had 3 weeks ago. The dark circles were faded. Her makeup was professionally done, her hair styled. She was wearing a navy dress that I recognized from her work wardrobe. Professional Janet, buttoned up and composed. But her hands were shaking as she pushed the coffee toward me. "Hi," she said. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." "Your lawyer said this was about Castellano Industries." I sat down, didn't touch the coffee. "I'm here for that conversation, and only that conversation." "Right. Yes, of course." She pulled out a folder, set it on the table between us. "Marcus, I need to tell you something about the company, about Richard Jr., and some things that were happening before he was asked to resign." I opened the folder. Inside were financial documents, emails, what looked like internal memos. What am I looking at? Evidence of embezzlement, not huge amounts, nothing that would show up in a standard audit, but consistent. Richard was skimming money from various discretionary budgets, funneling it through shell companies, basically stealing from Castellano Industries for the past 3 years. I felt cold. "How much?" "About $1.7 million total. I didn't discover it until after he was asked to resign. I was reviewing his files, trying to understand what projects he'd been working on so I could brief his replacement, and I found this. She gestured at the folder. Invoices for services that were never rendered. Payments to consulting firms that don't actually exist, that kind of thing. Why are you bringing this to me? Why not to Sarah? Or to the board? Or to the police? Janet's hands were really shaking now. She clasped them together on the table. Because I was involved. Not in the embezzlement. I swear to God, Marcus, I didn't know he was stealing, but in covering for some of his decisions. Approving invoices he asked me to approve without questioning them. Signing off on budget allocations that seemed weird, but he said were legitimate. I trusted him, and he used that trust to steal. And your affair with him makes you complicit. She flinched. Yes. If this comes out, if there's an investigation, my relationship with Richard will come to light. People will assume I was part of it, that I helped him or benefited from it. My career will be over, maybe worse than over. I could face criminal charges for fraud or conspiracy, even though I didn't know what he was doing. I leaned back, trying to process this. So you're telling me this because you deserve to know. Because Morrison Global deserves to recover that money. Because it's the right thing to do, even though it destroys me. Tears were forming in her eyes. And because I'm hoping, God, I know I have no right to hope for anything from you, but I'm hoping you'll help me figure out how to handle this in a way that exposes Richard without completely destroying my life. I looked at her, really looked at her, and tried to find the manipulation, the angle, the play, but all I saw was genuine fear and genuine remorse, and someone who'd made terrible decisions and was now facing consequences she couldn't control. Walk me through it, I said finally. Show me every document, explain every decision, don't leave anything out. We spent the next 90 minutes going through the folder page by page. Janet explained how Richard had slowly pulled her into approving things, how he'd framed it as streamlining processes, how she'd been too focused on her own work to question the details, how the affair had clouded her judgment, made her trust him when she should have been more skeptical. It was damning. For Richard, absolutely, this was clear, deliberate fraud, but also for Janet, who'd signed documents without proper due diligence, who'd let personal feelings override professional judgment, who'd been negligent, even if not malicious. Okay, I said when we reached the last page. Here's what's going to happen. I'm taking this to Sarah and to Morrison Global's legal team. They'll investigate, verify everything you've shown me, and decide how to proceed. That will likely involve law enforcement, recovery proceedings against Richard, and a full audit of Castellano Industries. And me? Her voice was barely a whisper. You're going to cooperate fully with the investigation. Answer every question honestly. Provide any additional documentation they request, and you're going to accept whatever consequences come from your negligence. I could go to jail. You could. Or you might just lose your job. Or you might somehow keep your position if the investigation clears you of intentional wrongdoing. I don't know. That's not my call. I closed the folder. But Janet, you need to understand something. I'm not protecting you from this. I'm not using my influence to make it go away or minimize it. You made choices, bad choices, and now you face the consequences. That's how accountability works. She was crying openly now. I know I don't deserve your help or your protection. I needed you to hear it from me first, before lawyers and investigators and everyone else gets involved. I needed you to know that I'm trying to do the right thing, even if it's way too late. I stood up, picked up the folder. The coffee she'd ordered for me sat untouched between us. For what it's worth, Janet, this was the right call. Bringing this to me before it came out some other way. It doesn't fix what you did, to me or to the company, but it's a step toward accountability. Marcus, wait. She grabbed my hand across the table. I looked down at her fingers on mine, remembering when that touch would have meant comfort, connection, home. Now it just felt like a stranger touching me. I listened to your interview, the one with Rachel Morrison. Janet, Please, just let me say this. She released my hand. You said you didn't know if you'd ever really loved me, or if you'd just loved an illusion. And I want you to know, it was real for me. At the beginning, before everything got complicated and twisted. I really loved you, the real you, not the version I invented later. And I'm so sorry I lost sight of that. I'm sorry I turned you into something small and simple because I couldn't handle being married to someone extraordinary. I wanted to say something cruel, something about how her love hadn't been enough, how sorry didn't fix anything, how she'd destroyed 12 years of my life chasing ambition and an affair with a criminal. But standing there, looking at her broken expression, I found I didn't have cruelty in me anymore, just sadness. I believe you, I said quietly. I believe it was real once. But real things can die, Janet. And ours died a long time before that party. We just didn't have the courage to admit it. I left her sitting there, walked out of the cafe into the cold November afternoon. The folder felt heavy in my hands, weighted with consequence and revelation and the continued unraveling of everything I'd thought I knew. I called Sarah from the car. How bad? She asked without preamble. Embezzlement, $1.7 million over 3 years. Richard Castellano, Jr. Janet was negligent, but probably not complicit. I have documentation. Sarah swore colorfully. Get back here. We need legal on this immediately. Already on my way. Marcus, how are you? I thought about that question, about sitting across from Janet, hearing her confess both to corporate negligence and to having once genuinely loved me, about the weight of responsibility settling further onto my shoulders, about how every day in this new life brought fresh complications I'd never imagined. I'm okay, I said, and surprisingly, it was true. I'm handling it. That's my brother. See you in 20. I drove back to Manhattan, back to Morrison Global's offices, back to the life I was slowly building from the rubble of the old one. The folder sat on the passenger seat, evidence of yet another betrayal, yet another lie uncovered. But I wasn't hiding anymore, wasn't pretending to be smaller than I was, wasn't letting other people's choices define my reality. I was Marcus Morrison, and I was finally learning what that meant. The investigation into Richard Castellano Jr.'s embezzlement took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of forensic accountants combing through every transaction, of lawyers deposing anyone who'd ever worked with him, of media speculation and employee anxiety at Castellano Industries. Through it all, I showed up, not to micromanage or seek revenge, but to be present, to remind everyone that Morrison Global took this seriously. Richard Jr. was arrested on a Friday morning. The charges were extensive: wire fraud, money laundering, embezzlement, falsifying business records. His bail was set at $2 million, which his father paid within hours, looking 20 years older as he left the courthouse. Janet wasn't charged. The investigation cleared her of intentional wrongdoing, though the report noted her negligent oversight and failure to exercise proper due diligence. She kept her job, barely. The board put her on probation, stripped some of her authorities, assigned her an oversight committee. It wasn't jail, but it was professional humiliation. She sent me one text after the report came out. Thank you for giving me the chance to come forward. I know it doesn't change anything between us, but it mattered. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in December in a courthouse that smelled like floor cleaner and desperation. We sat on opposite sides of the room with our lawyers, barely looking at each other as the judge ran through the settlement. The house went to Janet. I didn't want it, didn't want the memories. She got her retirement accounts, her car, her personal belongings. I kept everything else, which was virtually everything that mattered financially. Mr. Morrison, Ms. Morrison, your marriage is hereby dissolved, the judge said. 12 years, ended in a sentence. We walked out separately. I didn't watch her leave. That night, Sarah threw me a divorce party at her brownstone. Just family, David's excellent cooking, and a cake that said, "Congratulations on your freedom," in purple icing. Emma and Jacob made me cards with crayons, stick figures of me looking happy without the stick figure they'd been told was Aunt Janet. To new beginnings, Sarah toasted, raising her wine glass. To truth over comfort, authenticity over performance, and to my baby brother finally stepping into who he's always been meant to be. "Hear, hear," David added. I looked around the table at these people who loved me unconditionally, who'd supported me through the worst period of my life, who'd never asked me to be anyone other than who I was. "Thank you," I said, and my voice caught. "For all of this. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. For not giving up on me even when I'd given up on me." "That's what family does," Sarah said simply. "We show up." Christmas came and went. I spent it at Sarah's, watching Emma and Jacob tear through presents, helping David cook an elaborate feast, feeling both the absence of Janet and the relief of not having to pretend anymore. The new year arrived with possibility instead of dread. I'd been living in Sarah's guest room for 3 months, long enough that it was starting to feel less like temporary refuge and more like avoidance. "You need to find your own place," Sarah told me one morning in January. "Not because we want you gone, you can stay forever if you want, but because you need to build a life that's yours, not just borrowed from mine." She was right. She usually was. I found a loft in Tribeca, open, light-filled, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. It was modern where the Westchester house had been traditional, minimal where our old place had been cluttered with the accumulated debris of 12 years. It felt like a fresh start, like a space where I could finally figure out who Marcus Morrison was supposed to be. The literacy program at Bradford Community Center got a massive donation from Morrison Global, enough to expand, hire full-time staff, offer classes in multiple languages. I still taught there twice a week, but now as myself, no hiding, no pretense. Mr. Chen, now 83 and finally fully retired, came to the ribbon cutting for the new facility. "You did good, Marcus," he said, gripping my hand with fingers gnarled by decades of manual labor. "Your grandfather would be proud." "I hope so. I know so. He taught you that all work has dignity. You remembered that even when you forgot who you were. That's the lesson that matters." Morrison Global's portfolio expanded under Sarah's leadership, with me finally participating actively. I pushed for investments in companies that treated workers well, that manufactured domestically, that prioritized sustainability over short-term profits. Not every decision was mine. Sarah still ran the show, but my voice mattered now. I'd claimed my seat at the table. The media attention eventually faded. There were new scandals, new billionaires behaving badly, new stories to captivate the internet's attention span. The video of my revelation still existed, still got shared occasionally, but it became just another piece of internet history rather than breaking news. I dated, cautiously. Nothing serious, just dinners and conversations and slowly learning to trust again. Every woman I met had Googled me, had watched the video, had formed opinions about who I was based on my worst moment. It was exhausting and clarifying in equal measure. The people worth knowing saw past the headlines to the person underneath. One Saturday in March, nearly 6 months after the party that changed everything, I was walking through Central Park when my phone rang. Unknown number, New York area code. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Marcus, it's Janet." I stopped walking. "How did you get this number?" "I still have your phone number, Marcus. We were married for 12 years. She sounded tired, sad, but also somehow lighter. "I'm calling because I wanted you to know I'm leaving Castellano Industries. Not being fired, just leaving, moving to Seattle. There's a tech startup there that offered me a position. Fresh start, new coast, away from all of this." "Good for you," I said, and meant it. I also wanted to say thank you for not destroying me when you could have, for letting the investigation run its course fairly, for being decent when I deserved your worst. She paused. And I wanted to say I'm sorry. Really, truly sorry. Not for the specific things I did wrong. We've covered those, but for the whole thing. For wasting 12 years of your life on a marriage I couldn't maintain. You didn't waste them, I heard myself say. They taught me things I needed to learn, about boundaries, about authenticity, about the cost of hiding. I wouldn't be who I am now without those years, even the painful ones. That's generous. It's honest. I started walking again, the park spreading green and alive around me. Good luck in Seattle, Janet. I hope you find what you're looking for. You too, Marcus. You deserve happiness, real happiness, with someone who sees all of you. We hung up. I stood there for a moment, feeling the finality of it. That was probably the last conversation we'd ever have. The last time I'd hear her voice. The final period on 12 years of history. It didn't hurt the way I'd expected. It just felt complete. I continued my walk, breathing in spring air, watching families and couples and solitary individuals all living their lives in this shared space. I was one of them now, not hiding, not performing, just existing as myself in the world. My phone buzzed. Sarah, dinner tonight? David's making paella. Emma wants to show you her science project. I smiled. I'll be there. The old chapter was closed. The new one was still being written. And for the first time in my adult life, I was the one holding the pen. 2 years later, I stood in the lobby of Morrison Global's headquarters, watching the sun set through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting Manhattan in shades of amber and gold. In my hand was a speech I'd written and rewritten a dozen times, preparing for tomorrow's annual shareholders meeting. The first one where I'd be presenting alongside Sarah, not just attending as a silent presence in the back row. My reflection in the window showed a man I was still getting used to, confident posture, tailored suit, the kind of presence that made people look twice. But also something else, something softer around the eyes, a lightness that came from no longer carrying the weight of secrets. Still nervous about tomorrow? Sarah appeared beside me, her own reflection joining mine in the glass. Terrified, I admitted. 300 investors, all watching to see if the billionaire who pretended to be a janitor actually knows what he's doing. You know what you're doing. The expansion into renewable energy was your initiative. The worker profit-sharing program at Castellano Industries, your idea. The foundation has helped over 15,000 people learn to read in the past 2 years. You've earned this. I looked at her reflection. When did you get so good at pep talks? I learned from the best. She bumped my shoulder with hers. Grandpa Tom used to tell me that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was doing the thing anyway. You taught me that lesson all over again when you walked onto that stage 2 years ago. The stage. It felt like a lifetime ago now, that moment when I'd decided to stop hiding, when I'd chosen truth over comfort, authenticity over performance. Everything that came after, the divorce, the investigation, the media circus, the slow rebuilding of my life, had flowed from that single decision. I got a letter today, I said, from Thomas Chen, Mr. Chen's son. Yeah? How's the family? Good, but he wanted me to know that his father passed away last week, peacefully, in his sleep. He was 85. Sarah's hand found mine. Marcus, I'm so sorry. Thomas said his dad talked about me at the end, about the lessons we'd learned from each other, him teaching me about honest work, me teaching him that his work had dignity and value. He said, I had to stop, collect myself. He said his father died knowing he'd mattered to someone beyond his family, that I'd made him feel seen. You did. You made a lot of people feel seen. I thought about the literacy program, now operating in 12 cities. About the workers at Castellano Industries who'd gotten profit-sharing checks that changed their lives. About the foundation grants supporting adult education across the country. About all the small ways I'd tried to use my privilege for something beyond accumulation. "Do you think I'm doing enough?" I asked. "There's so much wealth, Sarah. So much power. Sometimes I feel like I'm just putting band-aids on systemic problems." "You're doing more than band-aids. You're changing culture, proving that business can serve people instead of just extracting from them. Leading by example." She turned to face me directly. "But yeah, there's always more to do. That's the burden of having resources. You're never done. There's always another problem, another community that needs support, another way to do better." That's exhausting. It's also the whole point. Grandpa Tom didn't build Morrison Global just to make money. He built it to prove that capitalism could have a conscience. You're carrying that forward. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Mr. Morrison, this is Maria Chen from Castellano Industries. I wanted you to know, the board just approved my promotion to president. First woman in the role. Couldn't have happened without the culture changes you pushed for. Thank you for believing in merit over connections." I showed Sarah. She grinned. "See, change happens. One company at a time. One decision at a time," she corrected. "That's all any of us can do. Make the next right decision, then the one after that. You're doing it. You're actually doing it." We stood there together, watching the city light up as darkness fell. Millions of lives, millions of stories, all interconnected in ways we'd never fully understand. I was just one thread in that tapestry, but I was finally weaving in my true colors instead of hiding in borrowed shades. "I have a date tonight," I said suddenly. Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "What? With who? Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you'd make a big deal out of it." I was already regretting mentioning it. "Her name is Claire. She runs a non-profit focused on immigrant services. We met at a foundation event last month. She asked me to coffee. Coffee became dinner. Tonight is the fourth dinner." "Fourth dinner is serious. What does she know about you?" "Everything. The whole story. Video and all. She says she's more interested in who I am now than who I was then." "Smart woman. I like her already." Sarah checked her watch. "You should go. Don't keep Claire waiting. And Marcus?" "Yeah?" "You deserve this. Love, happiness, someone who sees you clearly and loves what they see. Don't talk yourself out of it because you're scared." "When did you become a relationship expert?" "I've been married for 15 years. I know a few things." She hugged me, fierce and quick. "Now go. Be yourself. The real you, not the small you. That's the one worth knowing." I left Morrison Global's headquarters and caught a cab to the West Village, where Claire was waiting at a small Italian place she'd chosen. She saw me through the window, waved, smiled. No calculation in it, no agenda. Just genuine pleasure at seeing me. I walked in and she stood to greet me. "Marcus, I was starting to think you'd gotten cold feet." "Just running late, work stuff." I slid into the booth across from her. "How was your day?" And just like that, we were talking. About her work helping refugees navigate asylum processes. About my nervousness for tomorrow's shareholder meeting. About books we'd read, places we wanted to travel, small moments that made us laugh, normal conversation, easy and real, with someone who knew my history but wasn't defined by it. "Can I ask you something?" Claire said over dessert. "The whole janitor thing, do you miss it? The anonymity?" I thought about that. Sometimes. It was simpler, being nobody special, but it was also a lie. And I'm done living lies, even comfortable ones. "Good," she said. "Because I like you better complicated and real." We left the restaurant and walked through the village and she took my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. No performance, no pretense, just two people choosing to walk together for a while. My phone stayed silent in my pocket. The world kept turning without my constant attention, and for a few hours, I was just Marcus. Not Morrison, not the billionaire, not the viral video guy. Just a man on a date with a woman who made him laugh, walking through a city that felt full of possibility. The next morning, I delivered my speech to the shareholders, talked about our investments, our values, our vision for a capitalism that served humanity instead of just extracting from it. The applause was genuine. The questions were tough, but fair. I handled it. Because I'd finally learned the lesson that had eluded me for so long. Showing up as yourself, fully and authentically, was the hardest thing you could do, but it was also the only thing worth doing. The janitor who owned everything had become the man who owned himself, and that, I'd discovered, was worth more than all the billions in the world.